I would ask the members in the audience to have a seat. And before we actually call the meeting together, by the way, I'm Sue Buckner, I'm acting chair tonight, and I welcome you all here. We have a special presentation tonight, and we have some special guests of honor to make the presentations. So I'm going to call first Jeffrey Prang, who's our assessor, to come forward and to call your special person up.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Commissioners. It's great to be back in this room. It's really weird to be standing over here, but she's not talking to me.
Nothing's changed, Jeff.
No, more they change, more they stay the same.
Yes.
For the record, my name is Jeffrey Prang, City of Los Angeles. Okay, that sounds weird too. But I'm here this evening to add my voice to what I am certain will be a chorus of praise on behalf of your now departed colleague from the Planning Commission, Donald DeLuccio. Donald is just been one of my closest friends for decades. When I ran for City Council the first time and I began my campaign in 1996, Donald was one of the first people who stood up and volunteered for my campaign. He volunteered as my treasurer. When I was elected in 1997, he was my very first deputy, and he served for a couple of months on an interim basis as I put together my office. And I then appointed him to the Planning Commission. I think that was May of 1997. He served on this commission for 20 years. Donald was, in my view, an extraordinary commissioner. He was, one of the things I really respected about him was he was the neighborhood guy. He came for the neighborhood. He was the president of the West Side West Residents Association. And when he made his decisions, as he thoughtfully studied them, and he always studied his work. He read every page that came before him. He intimately knew the issues that were that he was being asked to render decisions on. He thoughtfully applied the needs of the neighborhood as well as the overall needs of the city. He weighed the community concerns with the economic development needs of the community. And I think the decisions he made in his 20 years on the commission were balanced, were thoughtful, and contributed to a much better vision for the city. I just wanted to come here tonight to say what a great job he had done and to commend him for his many years of service. His absence on this board will be felt, I believe. But in the meantime, when somebody gives 20 years of service, they deserve to be recognized and honored for that service. So I did bring with me tonight a proclamation from the County of Los Angeles. They're so much prettier than the ones we had in West Hollywood. And as I always tell people, these are nice documents. I recommend that to Donald, he owns a house, I recommend that you make a copy of this and put it in with your tax bill. See if it helps out. But if I may, I would like to present this county scroll to Donald. It has a lot of whereas clauses. I'm not going to read them all. Suffice it to say, it says a lot of nice things about him, and I welcome you all to read it later on. But Donald DeLuccio, on behalf of the
Thank you.
Thank you very much for allowing me to present this evening.
Thank you very much for being here and doing that. I'd like to call next one of our own, very own, John Durant, to the podium.
Thank you, Chair Buckner. I'm here tonight representing not only Mayor Heilman and my colleagues from the City Council, but all the people of the city of West Hollywood. Donald DeLuccio and Luis and Jeff Prang and I were all like young bucks in 1990 when this city was just getting started. None of us were serving in city government. We were just friends that would hang out on Huntley and talk about the city and talk about the future. And the irony is not lost on me that the same night that we're honoring Donald DeLuccio and acknowledging his 20 years of service up on Sunset, the Next Gen event is happening simultaneously, which means the next generation of young West Hollywood leaders are holding a conference about wanting to make a contribution to this great city. But I hope that the enthusiasm of the next gen will always respect those that came before them, those elders that preceded them, those of us who have been here from the 1980s and 1990s and helped build this community and this city. Donald DeLuccio is one of those people. 20 years on any body, on any commission, on any council is an extraordinary period of time. And Donald, having served us now for 20 years, but beyond that, even before he was a planning commissioner, we are all deeply indebted to him. West Hollywood, if you were here 25, 30 years ago, it doesn't look like it looks today. It looks like Hollywood, east of La Brea. And our shining city, this gem of a community, doesn't look like that part of Los Angeles. We have our own distinct character, our own distinct identity, and that is a result of many years of leaders, but especially those of you that are called to serve on the Planning Commission, who make a lot of the decisions that never even see the City Council dais. So on behalf of Mayor Heilman, my colleagues, I know Councilmember Meister is here tonight also, Councilmember D'Amico, Councilmember Horvath, and all the 36,000 people of the city of West Hollywood, Donald DeLuccio, thank you for being there, for being such a respected voice in our community, and we know you're not going completely away. You'll be back at some point. Ladies and gentlemen, Donald DeLuccio.
Should I say a few words?
Well, I'm
How
going to
much
come down.
time do I have, Chair?
First, I get to speak. I'm going to come down there, and I'm going to have a few things to say to you on behalf of our commission. So will you wait for...
Should I sit down?
No. Well, yeah. Yeah, before he does. So tonight, I'm acting chair. I'm going to speak on behalf of our commission. And we also have a plaque and a commendation scroll to give you on behalf of the city of West Hollywood. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's some...
Stand up next to you, can I?
Okay, sure.
I'm going to miss you.
I know, I'm going to miss you too. So Donald, I'm not going to go and read everything, but there's one thing here that I think is really fun. And it says, whereas the first planning commission was held at the West Hollywood Park Auditorium, the agenda included a creative sign at Mel's Diner, the Tiffany Theater, and Barbara's Place, a 10-unit senior citizens apartment house, and a 10-unit low-income apartment house. Jean Dobrin was the first public speaker. So nothing must change after 20 years. So here we go. Case planners were John Chase, Timothy Foy, Hassan Hagani, and planning manager was Lisa Heap, and the director of community development was Ray Reynolds. And throughout Donald's 20-year tenure, he faithfully served with the following: David Agai, John Altschul, Liz Anderson, Kate Bartolo, David Baer, Alan Bernstein, myself, Sue Buckner, Rogero Calavero, John Chase, Bradford Crowe, John D'Amico, Delinda Fisher, Joseph Guadarrama, Barbara Hamaker, Barbara Hewitt, Lynn, can you believe all this? Hubin Garner, Roy Hubner, Stacy Jones, Tom Jones, Sheila Lightfoot, Lauren Meister, Harriet Siegel, Heidi Schink, Steve Smith, Eric Thompson, Bradley Torgan, and Mark Eber.
Wow.
Quite a few.
Yes, 27 actually. I did
counted.
my research. Actually, there's been about maybe 47 planning commissioners since the founding of the city, and I think I served with 27 of them. I don't mean to steal your show here, my dear.
That's
but,
okay, you're not stealing it.
I do think as long as we have a mayor pro tem here, I have a suggestion. Beverly Hills has a commemorative plaque for all the council members and commissioners who have served on boards and commissions. I think that's something that West Hollywood should have as well, and maybe at City Hall or perhaps on the website, because I'm amazed that we have all this history here, but it's really not easy to obtain, and I think we should pay tribute to the wonderful folks that have served this city.
So in addition to that, we're good, as a gift from our commission and the City of West Hollywood, we're going to give you this plaque also in honor of your service, and we deeply appreciate everything. I personally appreciate you. I'm going to speak first, and then all of our commissioners are going to say a word or two. You were the first commissioner to reach out to me and have been my mentor ever since. And I've learned a lot from you, Donald. Both you've been a mentor, you've always been available if I had questions, and I really appreciate that, and still like that, up to the last commission meeting.
Thank
So
you.
thank you.
And I will continue to be available to you.
And I thank you. for
And
that.
I value our friendship.
Thank you so much. So.
And these are my notes.
Those are your notes. So this is for you.
Thank you.
And I thank you. So before you speak, I think all of our commissioners would like to say a word or two to you. You can stay here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Love you, honey. Yeah, plaque? Or you want to take a picture?
Oh, we need a picture, yes.
I want to speak.
You're the first speaker. Okay,
Thank you.
there you go.
Thank you.
One more? One more.
One more? Wow.
Oh, yes, and this is a gift, Donald, from our commission. Planning Commission West High, thank you for 20 years of committed and beautiful service, because you've really, I think our friend Jeff Prang said it very well. You have always been really prepared. You do your homework, and we really appreciate that. We'd be missing you, big
Thank
time.
Well, this is very pretty. Isn't this gorgeous? I have to say, and everybody's going to comment, it's not only me, it's all the wonderful people and resources around me that help me look good.
Turn around, sweetheart. Wrap these up so they don't get on this one. Okay. Who'd like to go first on the commission?
If that's okay, Mr. Commissioner, former Commissioner DeLuccio. I sat next to you down here for the last year, and I just want to thank you, sitting here and as a friend, for all of kind of your guidance. You always kind of helped me have a voice when you could tell I was hesitant, or when I was like, hey, I need to be heard, and I just want you to know how much I appreciate that. I was also always amazed at how good your memory is and how much kind of history of planning in West Hollywood you had and seemed to be able to recall without much effort at all. So I hope to, I aspire to serve as well as you did, and just want to thank you so much for your service, and you will be missed.
Thank you. I want to thank you too, Stacy. And I'm sort of giving my speech as we go along here. And
Okay.
our unsung hero here are, David Gillick, our secretary of the commission. He actually, I never had a pen, so that's why I never wrote things down. I always forgot my pen. So some point during the evening, David would come over and bring me a pen. So I had no choice. I had to sort of stretch my memory. But I enjoyed serving with you as well, Stacy, and I wish you the best.
John?
We learn a lot of things as we go along, and one thing we learned tonight is 20 years flies by it awfully quickly. 20 years ago, we were sitting here at the same table, except it was one or two buildings over. And we each had darker hair, And other than that, you look the same. You have the same approach to life. You have a wonderful sense of humor, and you're certainly conscientious and have done a wonderful job in getting the knowledge and the gravitas of what this is and conveying it to all of us and to conveying it to the 27 others that are on that list that are no longer sitting at the table. But most of them, some of them are still around. Unfortunately, some of them are not. But it's been a pleasure to sit next to you for a lot of those 20-some-odd years. And I can assure everybody he does have a sense of humor. And it's just been a very nice experience to have gone through this far with you. And thank you so much for everything that you have done. I hope the city has lots of facets to it, and I know you're going to stick around because you own your house here, but, stay involved, get involved, and, don't leave us alone.
So thank you, John. I have to say, I had no choice in the beginning. I had to rise to the occasion pretty fast because this guy challenges you. You were a big challenge in the beginning. You continue to be a challenge, and I had no choice, and I think I did rise up to the plate. And I want to thank you for your big contribution toward that.
Thank you.
Rogerio.
Commissioner Gelucio, we've only had 3 meetings together, and then I sat in on a 4th meeting, so we didn't have a chance to work together for very long, but upon meeting you, I immediately sensed your level of commitment and your level of knowledge, and you were incredibly supportive of me right from the beginning, and I want to say thank you for that, and I may call you in the future, and thank you.
Thank you, and you're welcome to give me a call anytime.
Lynn.
Well, Donald, in those 20 years, we've met so many times, one side of the dais or the other. And as a new commissioner, I've only served with you, like Rogerio, on a couple of meetings. But I appreciate your wonderful graciousness when you greeted both of us and how you welcomed us and offered your services. I think the recognition that you've gotten is missing one important piece, and that's a depiction of the gross tonnage of paper that you have read in the past 20 years, and if laid end to end, I can't even imagine. And I know just from our little experience here, the first couple of meetings, what that commitment involves, and I really thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, and I've enjoyed getting your newsletter over the years for your commitment to your West Hollywood North Residents Association. And as you leave the commission, you don't realize all the paper you collect, and just the minutes itself is tonnage. And I thought I would save all my minutes from every meeting, and I've attended actually 382 meetings. Wow. And I don't know, I'm probably going to have to shred most of my minutes. It's not possible, or to save those or scan them or something.
Thank you. I think Commissioner Altschull would like to say another
I
word.
just want to add one more thing to these proceedings, and this is addressed toward David. Although this particular presentation and our activities here in the last few minutes have not been a part of the official meeting of tonight, I would request, with the consensus of the entire commission, that the minutes reflect the essence of what happened at this presentation today.
Is that a motion?
Confirmed.
Okay. So we will do that. I too, before you say anything more, I want you to stay involved. I know you're committed, and I expect and want to see you come sometimes, take some public speaking slip, and give us some of your ideas, and your knowledge would be very helpful, especially we've got some new commissioners, and I know that you can contribute a lot and help us go along as we grow as a commission. So I appreciate that. And I know that, And Jean, I know you want to speak, and since you were the first speaker at Donald's first meeting, I would ask you to come on up to the podium and make your speech, whatever you want to say to him.
Would you like me to sit down?
Well, no, you can stand with her. this for the first speech? Did you want this to be part of this or part of the speaking?
I am Jean Dobrin, a 40-year resident of West Hollywood. Up until 1 year ago, I attended every single meeting of the Planning Commission unless I was in the hospital or in Europe, and I did both of those a couple of times. But it's hard to read my own printing. But to all those years, it was a wonderful learning experience. A very large part of that was the quality and knowledge and brilliance of the planning commissioner and the great dedication of Donald DeLucio. Donald is one of those exemplary citizens, and for several past years he's been making a living in Santa Barbara, but he is always promptly at 6:30 on those Thursday evenings when they're ready to attack the agenda. Having fully studied the agenda, he is one of the smartest and knowledgeable commissioners we have ever known. While he addresses the tough issues, thanks for your patience, while always taking fair and legal presentations and decisions. He will be always tremendously missed here for the quality and necessity of his presence and decisions, and for the affability and the graciousness which he has always tendered both to the staff and to the commissioners and the city. He is exemplary of what we always wanted the city to be, the best. And
Thank you.
that is Donald. And I'm going to miss him. Now, I don't come to all your meetings now because of my physical disability, but I was here all those meetings, and I know what Donald has given to this city. We will never forget it. So I'm going to kiss him again.
Okay. Thank you, Jean.
And by the way,
And,
some of those times when I was in Europe with Donald.
okay, good. If the public would allow us to delay the beginning of our official meeting tonight, I believe the photographer would like Donald to take a picture with all the commissioners. So we'll take a 5-minute break, and then we'll start our meeting. Thank you for your consideration. So do you want to go down, you guys?
Oh, quick picture with Jean. We'll get to you.
Go take your picture.
Do I get to say anything? Should I just? Yeah, I'm just going to make a few remarks and then and Adam Bass, you're going to be sworn in shortly, our next commissioner. I want to just thank some of the council members. Obviously, I want to thank former council member and mayor, I don't know how many times you were mayor, Jeffrey Prang, who is our current county assessor. Jeffrey is the one that dragged me into all this. I don't know if it's for the better or the worse at the time, but it's actually turned out to be wonderful, and I'll be ever grateful to you, and I'll always be your friend. I also want to thank Mayor Heilman, who can't be here this evening, he's teaching, and also Mayor Pro Tem John Duran, who was here to present my plaque this evening. I'll always be grateful to both of them for their loyalty and sticking with me until the end. I also want to pay thank you to our late council member Sal Gariello, who gave me the best advice early on, and that advice was, you need to be thick-skinned. And I know Adam was asking me, what advice would I give him when he comes up here shortly to be our planning commissioner? You do need to have thick skin. And besides thick skin, obviously you need to know the zoning ordinance, you need to know the general plan, but you also need to know the vision statement for the city, that we are respectful to each other. We're not always going to agree on everything. It's okay to disagree, that's healthy, but to do it in a respectful way. And I hope and I think I've always been respectful to staff and my fellow commissioners. I know sometimes I didn't always agree with staff on something, but I never put the name to the staff report. And then we just moved on to the next issue before us. I also want to thank our cable folks here. I know Jesse Lawson. Jesse is back, I guess, he's with the city. And Ken Eggenberger, who does. We don't see the cameras anymore, but when you were in the auditorium, the cameras are right in front of you. Jesse gave me the best advice ever. As you notice over the years, I always sat on that side of the dais. I don't think I was ever, only in the beginning I was on your side, Lynn. Actually, I look better on that side. I want to thank John Keogh for inviting me here this evening, for staff arranging all this, and David DeGracia. I've known both of them from the beginning. I think David was an intern, who's now our planning manager, and you were the a planner. And I actually knew John when I was president of West Hollywood West. Before I came on this commission, I met him at some kind of seminar. So it was kind of a coincidence that we began to work together. And Bianca Siegel, thank you for your help. Another one of our managers here with the city. And Galvin, where's Gavin? Raise your hand. I want to thank you too. He's fairly new, but he's doing a terrific job. So that's when I just called that out. You're the David DeGracia when I first came on this commission when you were an intern. And look how far you've come. And you're going to stick with it because you're going to have a wonderful career. And I also, and in general, I want to acknowledge all the past and present wonderful planners that we have. They're all dedicated and they all do a great job for our city. And Lauren Langer, our assistant city attorney, and Christy Hogan, I want to give you special thanks. I always would turn to the city attorney. Lauren, I never would remember her name. And I say, would our city attorney please give us some advice on this? But I know your name, Lauren. And of course, I want to thank Luis Marquez, who's back there, my other half, all these years, who's he's another unsung hero like David Gillick is, and he's probably more bummed out over this than I am, because every time I got a stipend for serving in a meeting, you get a stipend of $75, it used to be $50, he would always get the stipend for his play money. So this is not a goodbye. As you can tell by my passion, I'm going to find a way to continue to serve the citizens of West Hollywood, because my passion will never cease. In the meantime, everybody, please feel free, if you want to chat with me on any issue with planning, etc., to reach out to me. You all have my phone number. As has been indicated over the last month, I've heard from hundreds of folks when they heard I would no longer be on this commission, showing appreciation, and I'm grateful to that. I'm also grateful to all the citizens of West Hollywood, and thank you so much for such a wonderful experience serving on this commission the last 20 years.
You. And thank you all for indulging us in this wonderful tribute to someone who deserves it and who we all appreciate. So with that, I will call the meeting of together for the first time of July 20th, 2017. This is a regular meeting of the West Hollywood Planning Commission. So now I'm calling the meeting to order and Pledge of Allegiance. Donald, are you still here? Can you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now, the next order of business, and thank you for waiting, Lauren. I'm going to call to the podium Lauren Meister, who's going to give the oath of office to our new commissioner, Adam Bass. And he's an at-large appointee. He was appointed for a term that's going to end May 31st of 2019.
Okay, I'd like to say a few words first. I'd like to thank Donald DeLuccio for his 20 years of service. Anyone that's attended a planning commission meeting knows that it takes a lot of work to prepare for these meetings, and 20 years of that is really something to be commended. So thank you, Donald, for your service. I'm very excited to be giving the oath of office to Adam Bass. Adam is one of our East Side residents. We haven't had an East Side resident on the Planning Commission for a number of years, and it's been too long. So we're very excited about this. I have a couple of pieces of advice as well. One, you can never fit 50 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound bag. and as Commissioner Alscher will tell you, once you let the toothpaste out of the tube, there's no getting it back. So with that, come join me. Adam, if you'll raise your right hand, please. I, Adam G. Bass,
I, Adam G. Bass,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that while serving in the office
that while serving in the office
as a member of the Planning Commission
as a member of the Planning Commission
of the City of West Hollywood,
of the City of West Hollywood,
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I will bear true faith
that I will bear true faith
and allegiance
and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without any mental reservation
without any mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully
and that I will well and faithfully
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
on which I am about to enter.
upon which I'm about to enter.
Congratulations, Commissioner.
And with that, Commissioner Bass. Come. I forgot about signing.
One of our special.
Thank you. And Adam, come on up and take your place. and join our commission. We're glad to have you. Okay, the next item, thank you, Lauren. Next item is roll call. David?
Good evening, Commissioners. Tonight, our Chair, Guy, is absent from tonight's proceedings, so the record will reflect that. We have Acting Chair Buckner filling in for his duties tonight. Commissioner Jones,
Here.
Commissioner Hubengarner,
Here.
Commissioner Cavallero,
Here.
Commissioner Bass,
Here.
Commissioner Elchel,
Here.
Acting Chair Buckner,
Here?
and we have a quorum.
Thank you. The next item is approval of the agenda. However, before we approve the agenda, I want to announce to the public, if you are here to speak on either item 11B or 11C, those two items are going to be continued. You're certainly welcome, and I want you to stay, but I just wanted you to know that we will not be having public hearing on those items today. So with that, do I have a motion for approval of agenda?
And the motion is approved, unanimous.
Thank you. The next item is approval of the minutes of the last commission meeting. That was of June 15th, 2017.
Madam Chair, I would ask to correct the minutes.
Yes?
On item 8, my request was to have information that is available for review by staff that's especially cumbersome, but not exclusively just environmental documents. In other words, my request wasn't just environmental documents, but any large documentation that's available to staff should be made available to the commission before the week notice that we normally get.
Okay, was
So it's just, David, it's just the word specifically.
On which page is it?
Number 8.
Okay.
Just, it wasn't just specifically EIR documents, but especially, but not exclusively EIR documents.
Okay, staff will correct that.
With
Thank
that
you.
correction, do I have approval of the minutes of motion? Thank you.
And minutes are approved, 5 ayes and 1 abstention.
Thank you. And now we have public comment. Do we have items from public tonight?
We have no public comment this evening.
Thank you. We'll move on then to the director's report. Mr. Kehoe?
I wanted to also thank Donald DeLuccio for his service on the commission. Like he mentioned, we actually met at a conference before I worked here and before he was on the commission. That was kind of an unusual thing, so I've known him for a long time, and so I will miss him. Also, I want to welcome the newest Commissioner Bass to the commission. I'm sure we'll have a lot of good memories after this as well. So, so thanks to both of those. Just one item, brief update, and that's just on the cannabis. Some of you were able to attend the special city council meeting a couple of weeks ago where we brought in outside specialists to talk about cannabis regulations and the experience of people in Colorado. We had someone from the city of Fort Collins to give us their experience as a regulatory agency, and then some people who run cannabis retail outlets in Colorado and talked about how they operate in Colorado. Is a lot of good input. The city council gave us direction to move forward with coming up with language that would allow for retail cannabis. They also gave us direction to allow for on-site consumption of cannabis. They also gave us direction to allow for testing facilities and maybe some minor manufacturing and that type of thing, some boutique type manufacturing. So it's a broad width of areas that they feel that the city of West Hollywood should be open to the new cannabis industry. So we're working rapidly, and we're going to be bringing an item back to the city council hopefully in August saying here's some options. After we heard you in the past, here's where we think we want to go. We'll get direction from them, and then we'll be bringing it to the planning commission because there will have to be a zoning ordinance change And then most of the regulations of cannabis is most likely going to be in the business license. So the way it's looking right now, it looks like most of the cannabis, like I said, would be in the business license. Planning would really be involved in just a over-the-counter zone clearance for location, and all the regulations of the operators would be in business license. So that should be coming to the Planning Commission in September, hopefully. So it can then get to council by October, November, and then become effective by January 1st. And that's my update.
Okay, well, thank you very much. No questions of our, okay. Moving on then, are there any items by Commissioner at this point? Anybody? Stacy?
Not at this time, thanks.
I'm sorry.
Adam?
I would just like to join the chorus in thanking Commissioner DeLuccio for his incredible service. I have very big shoes to fill, but I appreciate everything you've done for the city of West Hollywood.
Thank you.
I
Nothing
was
at
just
this
kidding.
time.
Sorry, John. Commissioner Altschul.
Sorry.
That's my bad. I do have something to say. Besides thanking Donald, as we did earlier, I just want to welcome Adam to the commission. We have a very much changed commission since I started 2 years ago. And I guess change is the only constant. So I just welcome you to the commission. Look forward to, I guess, sitting beside you for the time being. And look forward to working with all of you as a unit.
Thank you.
And
John?
I too welcome Commissioner Bass, and it's great to have you with us, and I look forward to a long time.
Thank you.
Welcome, Commissioner Bass. I look forward to working with you over the next few years.
Welcome. We got a lot of new faces. I do have one item. I would like to ask staff if they could explore possibility of how we amend amend our ordinances to allow projects of a certain size, i.e. smaller projects, that don't have any variances, that don't have any bonuses, that don't have any incentives, to perhaps be expedited through the planning process, through everything, because they don't have anything significant to review. And maybe that would be a way that we could encourage projects that fit within our zoning, that comply with all of our codes, and encourage them by giving them an incentive, if you will, of getting through the process much more quickly.
Thank you. And staff, if you will take that into your meetings and see if we can do that. Thank you very much. And I too welcome you. I look forward to working with you. And I know that you've got a lot of history and experience in government work, so I think that you're going to add a lot to our commission from a different perspective. So thank you so much. Okay. Consent calendar, there is none. We'll move on now to public hearing. I want the public who are here who want to speak on particular items to be sure to take a speaker slip and give it to our secretary, and that way we'll be able to hear your perspective and your ideas as well. So first item is the 1013 North Spalding Avenue. And we have a a staff report.
Chair, just before we start, I live within 500 feet, so I'm going to recuse myself of this project. Thank you.
That's a good beginning. And thank you for letting us know. You need to leave the auditorium. Thank you.
Wait a minute. Is he a renter?
Excuse me, Adam, do you own property within? He needs to recuse himself still?
We've discussed it, and he's going to
did?
recuse
Okay.
himself on
Does
this.
he need to leave the room, or can he stay in the room as a renter?
Can he stay? Don't go too far, because we'll need you to come back for the rest of the,
Yeah.
huh?
Out of an abundance of caution, he feels more comfortable recusing
Okay.
himself on this
All
matter.
right, thank you, Lauren. So we'll move on now to 1013 North Spalding Avenue, and we have a report from staff.
Good evening, Chair Buckner and members of the Commission. I'm Adrian Gaia with the city's current plan division. On the screen is an aerial overview of the subject property, which is located on the west side of Spalding Avenue between Santa Monica Boulevard and Romaine Street. The development in this area contains a mix of two-story multifamily structures and one-story single-family residences. There is a three-story multifamily structure located across the street. Santa Monica Boulevard is located to the north and is fronted with properties developed with commercial uses. The proposal is a request to demolish a single-family residence and to construct an approximately 7,309 square foot, three-story, 5-unit condo building over a subterranean parking garage. All of the units have 3 bedrooms and 3.5 baths and have an average unit size of 1,410 square feet. The project provides 10 standard parking spaces, all in a side-by-side configuration, and 2 guest parking spaces in the garage. The project is subject to a green building ordinance. As such, the project is going to be a green building as it will exceed the city's current 60-point green building requirement by proposing a 90-point building. By reaching the 90-point threshold, the project will benefit from one of the green incentives of the city provides. As an incentive, the applicant has requested to divide the 500 square feet of required common open space among the 5 units private open space areas located within balconies and rooftop patios. The proposed project complies with all the city standards for residential districts, multifamily dwellings, and general development standards. The project was reviewed by the Planning Commission Design Review Subcommittee back in January. Overall, the subcommittee members believe the project was well designed, but had some reservations about the compatibility with the neighborhood. The subcommittee suggested minor architectural modifications to the building side elevations and ways of introducing additional light on the rear elevation, all of which were incorporated into a revised version of the building's design. The building is designed in a modernist style with all units in a townhouse configuration. The project will provide 5 residential units, a net increase of 4 housing units to the city's housing stock. The project incorporates sustainable design principles according to the city's green building ordinance. The development is complementary to the context of the neighborhood and is designed to meet the intent and the requirements of the city's zoning ordinance. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of staff on this project by commissioners? Go ahead, Lynn.
In your write-up, you discussed that this particular project is not going to shade the property to the north in a way that would obstruct any solar panels.
Correct.
Do we have actually any shade shadow diagrams, drawings to verify that?
No. It's based on the urban design. The urban designer and I went out to the site and visited it and saw that there were no existing solar equipment on the neighboring buildings to make that statement.
But there is a state law that says that we cannot build in a way that obstructs the solar capabilities of other properties, correct? And therefore, my question is, are we in any way jeopardizing that property next door with this building?
No.
How tall is that building? I couldn't see when I drove by.
The building just below it, the single story?
The building to the north of it.
The building to the north is multifamily. Yeah.
I'm just, because, correct me if I'm wrong, our attorney, there is a state law that says you cannot build in a way that obstructs a nearby building's ability to meet the net zero requirements by the state of California.
Looking at the roof, there's probably some other locations on the roof where solar panels could go. So if staff went out and looked and decided that, and used their judgment to determine that there was enough space on the roof where they could accommodate solar panels, it would probably be okay.
For the property next door?
For the property next door.
Okay, because it's about the shade and shadow, not whether or not there's room on the roof. It's about whether the new building is going to shade the existing properties.
Right, but there might be space on the roof that isn't.
That wouldn't be shaded.
That wouldn't be shaded,
Okay.
so the panels could go
That was
there.
my concern, and if
Yeah.
we make a statement in the write-up that it's not going to do that, it would be kind of nice to have those shade shadow images to say, yep, here we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Then we'll move on to public comments. Are there?
What about
Oh,
the
excuse me.
applicant?
Yes, we do. We do have our actual developers and people to speak. Sorry about that.
No, no problem. For the record, my name is Margaret Taylor of Apex LA, representing the applicant in this case. Thank you very much for your time. I'd also like to take a very short amount of my allotted time to thank Donald DeLuccio and what we experience as a member of the public, which is he helped create a culture over that period of time in the city and on the commission of quality public discourse, which is something that's so critical in our communities and in our society, and to help establish a tone that people of goodwill can both agree and disagree and have a good public process is something that is really something that we've appreciated about the city, and we appreciate his contribution to that and for his service. In terms of the application, we have had an opportunity to review the staff report. We thank all the work that Adrian has done working with us on the application. Thank you very much. The staff report, in our view, is correct in terms of its depiction of the project, its summary of the project, and its we've also reviewed the conditions of approval in both the development permit, demolition permit, and alternative track map with all of our consultants who by this point are very knowledgeable that they need to be very proactive with all of the different departments and incorporating those requirements into the design that you are seeing. And so the conditions are agreeable to us. We have no difficulty with the conditions of approval. In addition to that, I did ask on the question of the shade study, if there's a concern about being compliant with state law, we're amenable to that being a condition of approval, that the shadow be, documented as part of the building permit process, that there would be adequate solar exposure on the adjacent property. Since we need to comply with law anyway, we understand that you might want documentation of that effect as part of plan check. So we're agreeable to that. In terms of the project overall, we did go through an outreach process with the community as required. We had a very good dialogue with them. A lot of it was an interest in making sure that we understand the timing of the process and what the construction schedule will be. We are doing and have always done a kickoff meeting at the site, notice to the same notice that gets this public hearing notice, where we make ourselves available to that same community and are going to be available to them throughout to make sure that we are coordinating with them during any construction phases. In addition to that, I think in general there is a receptiveness to the design of the building, and that it provided a kind of a variation in terms of the architectural style in the city while still trying to meet the general character of the city and respect that. One of the unique features of this is there's a common room in the front unit on the ground floor. One of the things that we are trying to do as much as possible in these projects is create both a pedestrian sense of scale and also activation on the street. And so that common room is open to all of the tenants in the building. And we originally designed it to have sliding glass doors. When we went through the original urban designer, it was requested that they not be sliding glass doors, but we are amenable to that either way. I think we have heard a previous comment from the commission about trying to do things that do activate that front yard, and I just wanted to let you know that's something we're willing to do. The planters that are in the front yard are required by stormwater management, water purification, but we minimize them as much as possible, and from comments from the community tried to sort of staircase them up from the street level so that there was less of a physical presence at the street level, and we kind of gradually back that off. In terms of the design, I think you can see that we worked to bring in light, air, visual interest, articulation without putting too much decoration on the cake, one might say. So we're trying to maintain that balance. In terms of the height, we know that the community is very sensitive to height. We are not asking for any of those variations. We are following all of the height requirements. Were a little bit lower than the allowable height, and that's out of respect to the massing of the surrounding structures. We are meeting the setback requirements. On parking, one of the concerns from the community has been trying to avoid tandem parking spaces. These are all side by side, and we provide 2 additional guest parking spaces instead of just 1. So we have 12 parking spaces on site that are all individually accessible, as well as complying with the accessibility standards for the city. We do continue on each individual unit to have the first floor have that wet room, washroom accessibility as well, so that it can have a long range adaptability if anybody does need to utilize that first unit. It is it is an option in housing stock for the city to have a townhome experience where you don't have somebody above you, you don't have somebody below you. It provides an alternative. We understand that it's different than other units that may be more flat and all on the same floor. But what we try to do is really provide open air, a quality of a living experience, and to make that work for the community. I believe that was all of the primary things that we wanted to say. If you have any questions for us, we have our team available for you.
Okay. And you still have some time left if you need it. You'll
Well,
have
I
rebuttal
wanted
as
to
well.
say something nice about Commissioner Bass's bow tie. I thought that was a great way to start his service. But I don't think there's anything else from our team. In terms of the scope of the project, I think we would just want to emphasize that we have I think there is a mention in terms of process that projects like this that do meet all the standards of the code and try to work within the envelope that the city has provided. I think the discussions that you're having, the city council is having in terms of how to incorporate the design comments earlier into the process, and we're happy to give our feedback in terms of how that might be most effective. We've very much appreciated having commissioner input, and we would like to continue to work with the city on how to do that in a way that allows us to not have to be so vested in the design of a building from top to bottom, fire, stormwater management, everything else by the time you get to this point. I think there's wisdom in that deliberation. That being said, I think that we have taken the time with the city to really work through each of those individual items, and it has taken additional time. But at the end of the day, I think we've arrived at a very good project that has taken the feedback on an evolving design perspective, and also making sure that all of the departmental requirements for this to actually be constructed exactly as you see will be viable. And I think in the end of the day, hopefully we will all be proud.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Do any of our commissioners have any question? None? Do you, Lynn?
Just a quick one. Is all of the MEP housed underground?
Yes. So, and we don't need to have a transformer on the property or on the surface level. We can have a panel underground.
And so including the HVAC, all the condensers and everything are underground?
At this point, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. David, is there any?
Yes, we have 2 public speakers. The next speaker is Mr. Fryer.
Hello, good evening. My name is Uwe Fryer. I live on 1017 Spalding, number 7. I'm right adjacent to this building proposal, and I have a few questions in regards to how long that project might take, and the noise and so forth, as well as if I noticed on the plan, of course, it is higher than our building, so it definitely will have some shade issues, I guess, to my balcony and my neighbors' balconies. I'm also concerned, not just for this building, but the neighborhood in general, and the city in general, because so many of the, I want to call them Bauhaus bunkers, are being built, and apartment complexes coming up every corner. It's becoming almost cancerous, I want to say. The neighborhood, the charming neighborhood that we've used to have, is being squared for the obvious architectural style that is apparent. And I'm an interior designer. I'm not opposed to modernism and all that, but Our neighborhood and Martell or any of the streets have such cute houses, one after the other, that are absolutely adorable, and that's what makes the neighborhood charming. And then we build all these bunkers that and apartment complexes that cost, well, not cost, but will use more water, will use more traffic, and it's just going to be, I wonder in the general consensus of life, quality of living in the city. Because it's of course just going to get built up more and more, and we live in the desert, we don't have that much water to waste. So yeah, that's my concern. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is George Bujarski. Is that correct? George? Come on up. And I neglected to remind the public speakers that they should announce their name and their city of residence before they speak, and you each have 3 minutes.
Okay. My name is George Bujarski. I live in the same neighborhood as the proposed building. And I live in a pretty wonderful neighborhood. It's got a mix of people. In fact, the same pretty much mix of people who founded West Hollywood to begin with, and sort of conforms with the original purpose of West Hollywood, which was to provide for affordable housing once LA went off rent control. So it's a very tight area, but then all of West Hollywood is pretty tight. It's one of the things that isn't mentioned much about it is the amount of vegetation that it has. And that's not just individual properties. That's apartment buildings which were built, I don't know, 80s, 90s, whatever, which use part of the setback to provide for trees, a lot of vegetation. Another thing that is apparent about the neighborhood is that it is, except for recent approvals, uniformly either 1 or 2 story. So people don't have to worry about solar panels. They don't have to worry about light. They don't have to worry about, you know, the quality of life with air and sky and all that sort of stuff. I'm opposed to the currently proposed building on a number of grounds. One, it would abolish a one-family residence, affordable housing residence, to supplant it with no affordable housing. Of course, the property is rather small, only 5 units, so how could you ask for anything like that? But nonetheless, that's something that's been happening in the neighborhood. I don't think there's a count of how many affordable housing units have been supplanted by larger luxury buildings. And I really don't know of any new building in my neighborhood that has not been a luxury building. So it's sort of a trend, and my time is only 21. The second reason I oppose it is that the area now contains a nice hedge and a lot of beautiful trees. All of that is going to be abolished. All right. A third reason that I oppose the proposal is that aside from quiet enjoyment, we are now going to be getting either a year of hammering, or if we're lucky and the financing folds, a couple of years of Dust Bowl followed by the hammering.
Thank you very much for your
I
comments.
missed points 4 and 5, I'm sorry.
Sorry about that. Thank you. There are no other public speakers. We have a rebuttal from the applicant.
For the record, again, Margaret Taylor for the applicant of Apex LA, reside in Los Angeles. Have resided in West Hollywood, though. In terms of general response, There are code requirements within the city that we are having to comply with that does result, for example, we can't replace the unit that's on site with anything less than the 5 units that are proposed. And it is a multiple family density neighborhood, so that limits a little bit in the options that we have. We will be paying into the affordable housing in lieu fee as part of the project. We have decided not to take advantage of the affordable housing incentives and add massing on this particular property, but we hope to help with the affordable housing stock in that way. And in terms of the vegetation construction, we are a green building, sustainable facility that will help the environment in additional ways that is exceeding basic standards and actually providing a lot of wonderful amenities, both in the planning and long term of the project. We are also providing landscaping and trees in accordance with the landscape plan, and which will provide some texturing and softening of anywhere available that's left on site that allowed by code. We are putting landscaping.
Thank you. Any comments at this point? Okay, then I'll close the public hearing, and we'll have opportunity as commissioners to speak to the item. Stacy? Start down there, Lynn?
I'd like to start with, in fact, the trees and the landscaping. The landscaping proposed in this project, certainly aesthetically out front, is very flat. There is no articulation to the landscaping. There's no trees in that 25-foot setback. And trees do provide more than just shade. They actually provide water retention, et cetera, and rains, et cetera. I once again want to express my concern about a project that has no front porch. I think, Rogerio, you spoke to this last time as well on the last project we looked at, and this space there's no place to sit, there's no place to meet with your neighbors, there's no place to enjoy this green. You can basically only walk by it and not participate in it. Would like to also, let's see, hold on, I'll get my glasses. I'm again also concerned about what I call the East German appeal of these types of buildings that are very square, and they don't provide any real articulation, although I do appreciate the exposed spiral staircases. I think that adds some interesting design, but staff has made a comment here about the usable area that is open to the street out front, and it's not really usable. It's sidewalk and some grass. And those are my general comments on the subject, and I'll pass it on to Rogerio.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a long list, and I have a prepared statement, so bear with me on this.
Okay. That's what you're here for.
Thank you. My issues with this project is that it lacks the level of elegance and refinement that this type of architecture requires. You know, it's so minimal, and as Margaret, you said, there's little decoration on the cake. And when you have minimal decoration and you're trying to create a minimal building, each move has to be perfect and pristine. And when I looked through the plans, I couldn't quite pinpoint it at first, but as I started looking at the north and south elevations, I noticed that many of the windows were not aligned. And then I looked at the front elevation, and though I'm a fan of asymmetry in design, it didn't feel resolved. If you did a figure ground drawing of this building, I don't believe it would read the way we would like a minimal building of this type to read. And then, having designed buildings along this line, I know it's a tight play between the plan and the elevation, and one needs to push the plan along, then you study the elevation and you try to line it up with the interior, and then you move back, and it's a back and forth until you get all the elements, both on the interior and the exterior, to align properly. So I know that we're not supposed to be making comments on the interior, but because of the style and type of building that this is, you're forced to look at the plan. And once I looked at the plan, it became quite evident that why the elevation looks the way it does. Things are crammed into these spaces. That spiral staircase has no breathing room at all. That balcony it sits on, you can't really access the rock garden without crawling underneath the staircase. The bedrooms are small. They barely fit popular bed sizes that would be accommodated in that type of room with proper clearances around it. And then I looked at the balcony on the front, which is on the second level, which is very ceremoniously displayed in the elevation. But when you look at the plan, it's actually accessed by one of the smallest bedrooms in the complex. And you would think that a balcony that goes the span of the elevation of the building would be programmed by a living room or a kitchen, something that would activate that elevation, and it doesn't. So last Planning Commission meeting, we approved a building on the guise that it was adequate, and I believe this building falls into that category. It provides housing, but it does little for the community. And I kind of want to read my prepared statement because I want people to understand where I come from. I want people to understand that I'm not at all suggesting that we look to the past and continue to memorialize colonial styles of architecture like Spanish or Craftsman. These styles no longer reflect how we live or how we engage with our environments. It was their philosophies that brought our civilization to the political, social, and environmental disaster we are currently in. Their ideas of conformity, racism, homophobia, and excess are the very principles that we have fought against since the founding of our city. We moved here because we sought a sense of freedom that could not be found elsewhere. This spirit should be reflected in the architecture of our community. Looking back will only lead us down the wrong path again. As an example, I would like to see future projects embrace the experimental spirit of the Schindler House, one of the most significant pieces of modern architecture in our community and the world. If you haven't been, please go. It's on Kings Road between Santa Monica and Melrose, and is hailed as the birthplace of Southern California modernism. Be clear that I'm not saying that buildings need to look like the Schindler House. What I am saying is that I want to encourage architects and developers to embody Schindler's desire for social experimentation in order to develop a new way in which we engage our spaces and buildings engage their context. Our buildings need to reflect the progressive viewpoints of our community, not the rehash of the same 5 boxes decorated with a different skin like we see in this project. Now, Thank you. Now, I have said that I want buildings to have amenities for our community and for the people who live in the building. And as you mentioned in your presentation, Margaret, on page A1.2 on the ground floor, you have a community room. And Margaret, I would like you to consider putting back that sliding glass door, because I think it would at least make a gesture to the community that you care about the neighborhood, that you care about the social interactions between the people that live in this building and the people walking along the street. And moving away from the idea of trying to redesign the building, which I know you're too far down the path to do that, at least consider putting that sliding glass door so we can engage this building with the community and the people that live in it.
Just to be clear for the record, we originally proposed it with that, and the urban designer asked us to take it out. We are happy to put it back in.
Why did he ask to take it out, if you don't mind me asking?
It was Stephanie Reich, and at the time, I think she had mentioned a perspective pertaining to wanting to create more of a individual private residence.
When I look at the community room, it's so narrow. It's almost not functional. At least putting a sliding glass door would allow it to, allow it to bleed into the front yard. And
putting a sliding glass door tend to invite the community to come in, where this is a private home residence?
I don't think it would invite the community to come in, but it would just, like that balcony on the front. If it had been programmed with a living room and a kitchen behind it with glass windows, just the experience of walking down the street and the building would feel active. If it's not physical, psychologically, you're engaged with the space in some way.
Also, wouldn't there be a potential, at least as far as the developer is concerned,
Can we
about a
hold-
compromise of security if you have a sliding glass door that close to the sidewalk?
I mean, there's many quality sliding glass doors that would not compromise the security of the space. And when people are using it, I believe West Hollywood is different than that. I think we would.
I can just answer the question of the developer, which is, we do feel confident we can design it to be secure. We are willing to put, say, a bench or something out there to replicate. There are code elements that make it difficult for us to put in front porches, but in a way with a sliding glass door and with some furniture out there, I think we can at least establish some interactivity between the private residence, which it is. It's not a public space. It is a front yard, but still provide that interactivity. And the applicant has been willing to do that.
Okay, so we might, if you want to, you can make an amendment, but right now we're still in discussion. So thank you for your comments. John?
I think all of these design comments and design approaches are very, very cogent and intellectually quite good. The problem is, or one of the issues is, that design is a matter of subjectivity, and it is also a matter of taste and a matter of what the developer or what the owner wishes that they would like. We can't say, I don't think, to people that you have to not build a Craftsman or you have to not build a Spanish Revival because we want more socially active architecture like the Schindler House, which I agree is a marvelous thing to behold. But when I started in this endeavor with respect to planning, I was taught that, number one, architecture is subjective, that there is a First Amendment right, and that you can only go so far into saying to people, you must do this and you must do that. I think, I grew up in a place that had 3 porches. They were wonderful. But I don't see anything in our code that says you must have a porch. And again, in this era of crime, in this era of urban care for not having a property or people exposed to burglaries and robberies, it is a little bit dicey, I think, to tell them how to invite or not invite people onto the property.
Thank you. Commissioner Jones?
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Lynn Rogerio and Commissioner Altschul. Sorry, I should just start addressing everybody by their first name or by commissioner. I didn't mean to mix it up. Rogerio, you so eloquently state kind of the quandary in which we find ourselves now, and I love that you got into the weeds theory-wise on kind of architecture that we'd like to see in the city. And I am in agreement with you that we would like to challenge our developers and our architects developing in the city to be creative with architecture and design, and to build buildings that are new and that reflect our values as a community. But as John noted, I think it's also important for us, kind of beyond the finer points of some of the flaws with the interiors, which you are absolutely right, it would, I think, be hard to fit a normal-sized bed or large bed into most of those bedrooms. And I think that it's my hope that we can catch those things kind of before they come before us going forward. But, for the purpose of this hearing, I think it's important to state for the public record, kind of invoking the reasons why we can and cannot reject projects. And I think for that reason, I am inclined to support this project, but I also want to acknowledge your comments because I do think they are significant and I think that they are noteworthy.
Thank you. I too appreciate your comments and would encourage our developers and architects to lift our design and architecture so that we do have more variety and more interest, and especially if we're replacing individual homes with larger projects, multifamily projects. On the other hand, we are getting additional housing units, which we need and which there is a huge demand for. We can't seem to meet the demand in our city for the number of housing units that we could use in terms of people wanting to come and live in our community. On one hand, there's a disadvantage because we wanted to remain like our cozy city that many people think it is, but it is a city and it is growing, and that's also a benefit to us as a community. So what I particularly like about this project, I understand that there's common space. However, I think that having your own individual open space is a benefit to the individual homeowner. People don't really meet in the small common space areas that some of the projects have, so people can enjoy their own open space in a development as this is, where there are townhomes. It's a different way of living, and it is desired by many people. So we do need to have a variety of developments in our community, so this is one that we have. In addition, I think that it meets all the multi-family standards that are expected in our code and required, but in addition, it also, in there, some of the proposed things, it's better than required, and so I appreciate that as well. And I'm prepared, even though this isn't my favorite kind of architecture, I've said that many times, and I do think that it is not particularly exciting, but it does meet the requirements, and because of that I am, and I know it went through a couple of times in design review as well. So I am prepared to support this project at this time. Mr. Altschul?
I would move the staff's recommendation in support of the project.
And it's been moved and seconded. We have a vote.
I have a question. The amendment for the sliding door.
You didn't
I'd
do
like
that.
to make a motion. Yeah, I was
Yes,
waiting
they
for that.
volunteered that. I think that would be appropriate.
Is that okay? Press the commission.
Well, then we got a little ahead of ourselves maybe, because
Sorry about that.
I would like to also amend and the landscaping include trees. I mean, the landscaping does not include any trees. You got a 25-foot setback with no trees.
So
And you're taking
backing
out a
off
substantial
now.
amount of trees. So
There were trees there to begin with?
Yes.
Margaret, would you be willing to work with the?
Yeah, I can address, we do have trees in the rear yard. The front yard is restricted somewhat because of code requirements for the driveway and the parking requirements and where the garage has to come out. And it leaves us not enough soil for the number of trees that could go into the front yard. We do have the parkway, which has an existing tree that's scheduled to remain, and we're not disturbing in any way. And we do have a lot of other planting material, including along the sides of the property, that will add some landscaping. But the
it doesn't need to be a tree. I mean, you could do some large shrubs, you could do some bigger ornamentals,
So you want
anything.
some height differentiation
Yeah,
as much as
you-
possible in the front yard?
You've got, I'll be honest, I'm with Chair Buckner in the aesthetic on this, but I can enjoy modern just as well. But this appears to me a fortress. And I think at the minimum that some good landscaping, some really creative landscaping with some taller elements would soften the fortified look of the building.
So I'll look at my applicant, we are agreeable to put in as high as possible with our soil level as possible as a condition to the landscape plan, working with staff.
Lauren, did you want to?
Okay, so in order to accomplish all this, you could add a new condition 8.9, which is under design requirements, and it could say, the plans shall be revised to incorporate sliding glass door on the ground level and seating opportunities and plants of diversity in heights to the satisfaction of the director. Does that capture the 3 points?
Yes, with the idea that there are certain requirements in terms of the use of water and the capture of the water and so forth. Is that correct?
Yeah, so seating opportunities and plants of a diversity in heights to the extent possible,
Given the soil conditions.
possible, given soil conditions to the satisfaction of the director.
Actually giving structural and foundational
Okay.
requirements.
Right.
And stormwater management.
Yes.
Given, could you repeat those three? It's soil,
Structural, foundational,
soil,
and
structural,
stormwater management.
foundational. Stormwater management.
So with those new conditions, are we prepared to vote?
David.
The motion passes, 3 ayes, 1 recusal, 1 no.
Okay.
We have an appeal process. The resolution the Planning Commission just approved memorializes the Commission's final action on this matter. This action is subject to appeal to the City Council. Appeals must be submitted within 10 calendar days from this date to the City Clerk's office. Appeals must be in writing and accompanied by the required fees. The City Clerk's office can provide appeal forms and information about waiver of fees.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to take a 3-minute break and allow our other commissioner to come and join us here on the dais, and we'll be back with you. Thank you.
Can we make it a full 5 minutes?
5 minutes? We'll do 5 minutes.
Just a quick
Thank you.
intermission. Thank you.
Can I just get clarity on was my math wrong? Because I know.
into architectural words.
Jean, we're going to call the meeting back in order. So thank you. And we're going on to item 11B is 8279 Santa Monica Boulevard. And I understand that we are going to continue that to a date uncertain. It will be renoticed to the public when we have a date to go forward on that item. The next item is 11C, 8500 Sunset Boulevard, West Tower. And that item also is going to be continued, and that date for that item will be Thursday, August 3rd, 2017. The next item is a zone text amendment, which has to do with art on the commercial construction fencing, and this item is being brought back to the commission, so we have a staff report.
Good evening, commissioners and members of the community. My name is Garen Serapian, Associate Planner with the Long Range and Mobility Planning Division. This evening, we are bringing you back a zone text amendment that would require art on construction fencing for certain commercial construction projects. The Planning Commission did review the proposed amendments during a public hearing on April 6th, 2017. Following a lengthy discussion, the Commission ultimately recommended denial of the proposed amendments. During the meeting, the Commission expressed interest in keeping the program voluntary as it is today and allowing for artistic branding on the construction fencing. Staff brought back a resolution of denial to the Planning Commission on June 1st, 2017. The Commission collectively voted to take no action on the resolution of denial at that meeting and requested staff to renotice a new public hearing at a future date to reconsider the original staff recommendation. Per the Commission's request, we are bringing you back a zone text amendment with a recommendation to require certain commercial development projects to install art on construction fencing. Just to start with a brief background, in October of 2015, the City Council directed staff to draft a zone text amendment requiring temporary art on commercial construction fencing and work with the Arts Division to develop an approval process for the artwork in the program. The original council staff report can be found in Exhibit D of the staff report. There are two components to this program. The first is requiring which types of projects would we require to install art on their construction fencing. This is a zone text amendment and falls under the purview of the Planning Commission. The second component of the program is developing an approval process and program for art on construction fencing, which has been reviewed and approved by the Arts and Cultural Affairs Commission. This evening we have Rebecca Eman from the Arts Division who will briefly go through the approval process following my presentation. So the proposed ordinance in the staff recommendation would require the following commercial development projects to install art on their construction fencing. This includes commercial projects with 10,000 square feet or more of building area. The thresholds will apply to construction fencing for large commercial development projects and only apply to the commercial facing frontage of the construction fence as illustrated in the diagram on the screen. For such projects, the noticing for art on construction fencing will occur during planning entitlements and will be included as a condition of approval prior to the issuance of any building permits. Previously, this threshold included the required commercial development projects with a demolition permit to also install art on construction fencing. The Commission on the April meeting expressed concern that making the commercial projects with a demolition permit would perhaps cause some undue burden on small businesses. In response, the resolution you see today took out this requirement and only applies to commercial projects that have 10,000 square feet or more of building area. And just to include, all other commercial projects would be allowed to install art on construction fencing. The process would be in place as it is today. Is signage allowed? So future occupancy signs, project renderings, name of architects, that's already embedded into our zoning ordinance, and that can be incorporated into the art on construction fence. For construction signs, we allow 32 square feet. Future occupancy signs, also 32 square feet. So that can be incorporated into the artwork as long as it can be calculated through this requirement in the zoning code. And off-site signage is not allowed citywide and would not be allowed on the construction fence as it is today. So just to, before I hand it off to Rebecca, I wanted to briefly clarify on the, for page 4 of the staff report under estimated costs, the $21 artist fee was calculated per linear foot. And not square feet. The fabrication cost was calculated per square feet, so therefore the construction fencing for the 8120 Santa Monica Boulevard project cost a total of approximately $25,000. So the artist fee was calculated per linear foot versus the fabrication was per square foot. So now I'll hand it over to Becca to briefly go through the process.
Good evening. My name is Rebecca Eaman. I am the city's public art coordinator. I'm happy to be here tonight to talk about this process.
Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, so in your packet, we outlined the art approval process. This art on construction fence program will operate under the city's mural program, but it will follow an expedited approval process with Arts Division staff. The application review process is detailed in the agenda for your review, and this slide gives you kind of a top-level overview of this approval process. First, applicants will be required to source their artists from the WeHo muralist roster, which currently has about 50 artists on it, and they are also given an option to submit an artist application to that roster. Of course, the artist would have to meet the minimum requirements to be approved for the roster. Those applications can be reviewed in tandem. Second, the applicant will submit an application online, and that application will be reviewed by staff. The artwork must, once it's reviewed and approved, must be installed on the construction fence within 5 days of construction fence assembly. Then we will review all of the applications utilizing the review and evaluation criteria that's been approved by the Arts and Cultural Affairs Commission, and it's also posted on our website. All approvals will be given within 10 days of an applicant submitting, 10 business days of an applicant submitting an application, so we're really interested in expediting this process for them, making it as simple as possible. Once the application is approved, the applicant must submit a zone clearance permit, which is an over-the-counter permit fee that can be done at City Hall. Currently, the fee for that zone clearance permit is $117. And the applicant will be asked to submit photographs of the completed artwork and submit that to staff, and they will also be required to provide ongoing maintenance of the art on construction fence project.
Commissioner Altshuler, you have a question?
Who approves the artists' applications to be on the list?
The artist applications, if they're currently on the roster, they've all been reviewed by the Arts and Cultural Affairs Commission.
And
if an artist is submitted in tandem with the application, it will be reviewed by staff. So it will follow the same review process.
Well, there's 5 days installation requirement. I forget 5 days from what, but does all that fit within the time schedules?
We ask that an online application be submitted at least 25 days prior to the applicant anticipating the assembly of their construction fence to allow for that review period.
Could that be simplified somehow? It's a little complex. That's just my observation.
Okay. Any other comments or questions of staff?
We have more.
We have more?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wanted to share a couple of examples to give you visuals. I'm from the visual world, so I like to share my pretty pictures. This project is called Site Fence Mural, and it was designed by a Los Angeles artist, Jeff McFetridge, for the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis. And I bring this to you because it's a great example of activating a very large space with an eye-catching, non-commercial imagery. The zoetrope-like sketch of drawings forms a beautiful animation that both pedestrians and people passing by in cars can enjoy. The next example that I bring to your attention is something a bit closer to home. The BID in downtown Los Angeles was tired of seeing graffiti pop up in fences in their area, and so they initiated a pilot art on construction fence project with a $10,000 budget. They commissioned a nonprofit organization, the Do Art Foundation, just one of many in the Los Angeles region, who brought on the artist Shrine On to create a unique artwork with the community. Now, we wanted to also give you a visual of some of the projects that are currently in process. These projects shown on the screen right now would be subject to the art on construction fence zone text amendment. Also, some successful projects that have already taken place in the city include this one at 7969 Santa Monica Boulevard. This was a 10 by 50 foot chalkboard that was temporarily installed with a saying that simply stated, "Before I die, I want to." And it allowed a blank space for the community to engage and enter their own response. This project was hugely successful, filling up in just the first few hours it was installed, and the owner of the property was committed to wiping it clean every week to allow new spaces for new voices. And then this project at 8120 Santa Monica Boulevard is the city's pilot art on construction fence project. An artist team was selected to create an original artwork to pay homage to the anniversary of Route 66. The project consists of 32 unique banners for the 684 feet of fence. For the initial installation, the artist worked directly with the fabricator, but we have since replaced 3 signs due to wear and tear, and I can say the process was very easy, and I was able to order new signs and have them installed within a week. And then our final project is our kind of shining star. This is a project that was at 8520 Santa Monica Boulevard in anticipation of the new Shake Shack. Shake Shack brought this project to the city at no cost, and we approved it through the Arts and Cultural Affairs Commission as a temporary art project. They also partnered with a local PR team who went out and programmed this happy wall, is what it was called, on a weekly basis. So there was these planned signs, but it also allowed for the community to interact and create their own signage in the in-between times. We'll open it up for
Any
questions.
Commissioners, any questions of staff? Lynn?
Yes. I'm
Get
curious.
used to you having questions.
Yeah, sorry. I kind of consider it doing my job.
Okay, we're happy to have it.
I'm curious as to why you are proposing to not have signage on a residential street, when in fact the Walgreens example is a great example of all street sides having signage.
So the reasoning behind requiring the art only on the commercial facing frontage was some of the concerns of having the burden on the developer to potentially help alleviate that burden. But if the commission would like to change that requirement, we could amend the resolution.
I would certainly request to do that, because I think the Walgreens example is a perfect example of why would you just have it on 2 sides and then have nothing on the residential street.
Well, and technically, I'd like to point out for that particular site, the only required zone would be the Santa Monica Boulevard zone. That is the only commercial zone. So Crescent Heights wouldn't have gotten any art on it either.
I rest my case.
So are you making it
I would like to move to amend to.
Question first.
Sure.
before you do that, let's have a little.
No, she can make the motion, and
You
it can be seconded, and we can
Okay,
discuss it.
Okay.
I would move to amend.
There may be some public speakers
Oh,
that would
I'm
like to
sorry. I
address
didn't
us
realize we had-
before.
Sure.
Do we have some? Yes, we do. We have our first speaker, would be Mark Davis. Would you like to come up and address our commission on this item? Thank you.
Hello, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Mark, would you state your name for the record and your city of residence, please?
Mark Davis from Los Angeles.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm here before you guys on behalf of Alchemy Media. We're a local company based out of LA as well, off Overland and Palms. And we're the urban street media provider that allows you to choose how, when, and where you want to advertise. Usually traditional wild posting, highly targeted, large format dedicated signs, and interactive, experiential types of advertisements. Our media company grew out of the music industry in the late 60s with Gary Schaffner working with Bob Dylan and actually being at the Roxy's opening. So it started as a very local company handing out flyers. And since then we've grown and focused mostly on entertainment and fashion industries. Like I said, we're the urban eye-level, pedestrian-oriented media company, and we work to develop engaging, pedestrian-focused, and immersive advertising opportunities. We make it as artistic as possible, and I'm here to touch on a possible alternative that hopefully could fit the artistic goals and interests of the city while sprucing up the eyesore construction sites that impact pedestrian and streetscape experiences. So for the last decade or so, we worked with the City of LA, the Graffiti Abatement Program, to help address vacant lots and construction malls. And actually in 2007, we helped to direct the city to run this pilot program. Since its inception, we've proved to reduce graffiti by about 100%. So, you know, this is a very different program. It's not tailored to West Hollywood or its needs. It was great to see the presentation there with the chalkboard. Those are the kind of things that we do. So more immersive, more pedestrian oriented, more as creative and artistic as possible and as engaging to help, you know, really turn a construction site from what could become a nuisance into more of a, you know, friendly, engaging, and well-maintained for the length of a construction project. So, you know, you don't deal with the damages, graffiti, dumpings, things like that. So when we saw this was coming up, it seemed relatively in line with the Sunset Strip plan as well, trying to draw more attention, draw more advertising potential revenue, both for the property owner as well as, you know, for the city and city programs. So for LA, we focus on graffiti. That was the need. For West Hollywood, it could range to different community programs from transportation, transit, pedestrian-friendly programs to even homeless. And so, you know, these are the types of things that as a company that's not as large scale as the traditional big advertising companies we do. And being local, we take pride in the city and try and do our best to tailor the right thing for the right city. And so we see this kind of as an opportunity to, you know, plug in some additional opportunities through some percentage, something to provide additional revenue while, you know, having a bucket of money that goes towards the city's interests, the property owner's interests, and really create a win-win. So that's really why I'm here today, is just to present another alternative. And so I brought some materials as well, if you guys are.
Thank you. The next speaker at 11. And then I was just going to do that, Jean, thank you. And followed by Jean Dobrin. So you can get, but you are the next after Ed.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission, and welcome to our new Commissioner Bass. Based on my comments the previous time, I don't think it's any surprise that I think this is a terrible idea. There is very good reason why no other jurisdiction in the United States mandates this for commercial private projects, and that is because art is political speech, and the government should not compel political speech. This is a terrible idea, but more importantly than that, if you pass this resolution tonight, you will be in violation of the Brown Act. 2 meetings ago, you directed staff to come back with a resolution of denial. At the last meeting, you took no action on that, you voted to take no action on that, and to bring it back for further discussion. You did not vote to rescind that motion. You did not vote to rescind the request to bring back a resolution of denial. That's why there is nobody here. There were 12 or 18 speakers last time on this when it was noticed properly. This is not proper notice. This should have come back again, at least with an alternative of a resolution of denial, because that was the last action you took. You voted to deny this. You did not vote to reconsider that denial. So here we are. This is not being properly noticed. That's why nobody's here speaking on this. So you would, if you pass this motion tonight, whatever the other merits will be, you will be in violation of the Brown Act. This is not being done properly. If you want to come back, renotice this as an approval, as a complete do-over, that's fine. Let's have that conversation when we can actually have that conversation properly noticed. Thank you.
Lauren?
Lauren, I'd like you to help us on this issue. You raised a point.
Sure. The commission voted for staff to bring back a resolution of denial the first time you heard this. That wasn't your final decision on the matter. The final decision would have been had you voted.
Not yet.
Jean, 1 second.
Jean, could you hold it for a minute? We're listening to our city attorney on this comment from the previous speaker. Just one moment, okay? I'm talking.
Jean, we
1
have
second.
a procedural matter.
Jean, if you just wait up, we have a question for our city attorney, if you would just wait a moment. Thank you.
So you directed to bring back a resolution of denial. Then the commission asked that the matter be renoticed for a full public hearing before acting on that resolution. And I believe that's what staff has done, and they can report as to how it was noticed, but I believe this is a fully renoticed public hearing to reconsider the matter.
Okay.
And so you had not taken a final decision on the matter. You properly placed it on your agenda as, see? As a public hearing on a zone text amendment.
Just hold on a minute. We need to hear from our city attorney. I'm sorry. Okay.
Jane, we're not ready for you quite yet. Please sit down. Not quite yet.
Sorry,
We are
Gene.
we are still dealing with a procedural matter.
Just hold 1 minute.
Please sit down for a minute.
Just let her stay there.
I thought she was through. No, she's still talking.
Thank you, John.
Started talking after I came up here discussing. Can I
Absolutely, Jean. That's a very good idea. Thank you.
If I can interject on the noticing, Chair.
Yes.
The zone text amendment was noticed in 2 local newspapers, the Beverly Press and the West Hollywood Independent, a quarter-page ad on July 6th, 2017. There was a mailing done, and all legal postings were done on July 6th.
Okay. So then I believe we can proceed with this hearing.
Yes, the direction
Thank
to
you.
notice a new public hearing superseded the first direction to bring back a resolution of denial.
Okay.
But can I ask a question about that, actually? So, and again, I just want to understand from a process perspective. We voted in the original, and I know this is reflected in the staff report, but we voted, I think 4-2 as a commission to recommend not approving, to recommend denial of the resolution. But I guess my question is, the way that it was noticed and the way that we voted on it last time, did we vote to reconsider the original ZTA and the original resolution?
I think that was everyone's understanding. To renotice a full public hearing on the text amendment was to hear it all over again and start the process again. And so I believe staff put staff's recommendation, the way they did the first time, in the packet. That was the understanding of the direction.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that you have to approve it. It was just a second hearing on the matter.
So we're here as if it was the first time, basically.
Yes, you can have a whole new public hearing. I believe you have some new commissioners, and you can discuss the matter all over again and make a new recommendation.
Okay.
But it was properly noticed.
Yes, it was properly noticed as a public hearing.
Okay, so we will proceed. And John Kehoe, can you give the mic to Jean so she can address us, please? No? Yes, it is, Jean. Thank you.
which is a residential street. And they're building an enormous project in the low, the word is mileage, I don't know, just north of Santa Monica. And it had screening as big as this screening on the property. And, but that's a residential street. But then on the other hand, the lawsuit that I won against the city about 7 years ago on Santa Monica Boulevard, where they're going to build a condominium and apartment and restaurants, is on Santa Monica Boulevard. So my stupid question is, what constitutes commercial project? In other words, does this place that's on Doheny with the enormous screenage, like tremendous, is that supposed to be out of the question? But the one that's on Santa Monica Boulevard, which is a commercial street, can I have the answer, please? Thank you very much. And by the way, you said followed by Jean Dobrin, and I started to go there before she opened up her mouth.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Jean. I'm sorry about that. Okay, thank you. Are there any other public speakers?
No, no more public speakers.
Can we address that? Gavin?
Sure. So the requirement would be on any project that's in a commercial zoning district as identified in our zoning map of the city. Yes, that's correct.
Yes, this particular proposal, so this proposal, as I guess staff was directed by City Council, was for commercial properties and not residential. So that's why we're considering it for commercial properties. Thank you. Although I do know that's a big fence, Jean, and along that Doheny project. So.
There's no art on that.
Huh? There's no art on it?
No.
No, but there could be. I mean, a developer who has a big project can volunteer to do that, and any project less than 10,000 square feet could also volunteer to do that. And maybe this will create a lot of interest in having people do it on an elective basis. Okay, I can close the public hearing then.
I'd leave it open.
Huh?
I'd leave it open.
Leave it open? Okay, we'll leave it. All right, do you want to discuss this, John?
Yeah, we can discuss it, but I'd leave
Okay.
it open just in case.
We'll leave it open just in case. And we'll have commissioner comments on this issue. Stacy, I'm going to go at your...
Sure, I'll start this time. So I want to thank staff. I know a lot of work has gone into not just the program through the Arts Division and Arts and Cultural Affairs Commission, but also with Community Development Department. So I'm hugely appreciative of the amount of work that went into this. I know it's kind of been a long time coming. I think it's a great program. I personally don't feel that mandating artwork on any size project, I think it's inhibiting to creativity, and I think what I'd like to do is make it optional and really direct staff to provide or look at incentives we could provide to developers to kind of encourage this, because I actually think a lot of developers would put art on construction fences, really for any size project, if there was an opportunity for them to be creative about the way that they do it. I think it's a little prescriptive, and as it stands right now, I do not feel comfortable supporting it. That's where I'm at.
Thank you. Adam, would you like to take a...
Let me take a stab and try to figure out the microphone so I don't scream into it. A couple of questions. In your presentation, you showed current projects that would be impacted by this. I just want to make sure this wouldn't be retroactive in any way. So that's just an example of in the future what would be impacted.
Yeah, that's correct. That was just to show if this was in place today, those projects would have been required to install art.
I thought so, but I wanted to make sure. I watched all the previous meetings so that I would be up to date on your conversations on this in preparation. So the one thing that was missing for me, I did ask a question about why we didn't have a recommendation for denial here of staff before coming, and since that's how the commission had voted. But like Commissioner Jones, I'm very interested in looking at more of an incentive approach as opposed to mandating it. I like this idea. I would like to move it forward, but I'm wondering if incentivizing it as opposed to mandating it might be the appropriate direction. But I do want this to move forward. I wouldn't be comfortable with the denial because I think it is the right thing for West Hollywood to do. And one other question here in my notes is, as we have the conversation, and Commissioner Hoopengarner was talking about perhaps extending it to residential, it would still only apply to commercial properties, but just those that faced residential.
That have
correct?
some side fencing that would be on a.
Okay, I wanted to.
The point is that this, the signage would be on any street face, okay?
But it
So if you
wouldn't-
look at Walgreens, it's on Crescent Heights, Santa Monica, and I always forget, is that Havenhurst?
Havenhurst, yeah.
Havenhurst, but not on the side next to the house.
Right, but
Okay.
it wouldn't affect any residential developments in any way, and I wanted to make sure, because I think that would be a step too far.
No, I was
Not
just
as if-
referring to the map on page,
No,
Not as
that was just a
currently
clarification, I
proposed.
think I got that,
Yeah.
right. But in general, besides being a creative city that should really be promoting this art, the argument from one of our public speakers that it's going to decrease graffiti, and I also think that developers are more likely to maintain these fences where the other fences seem to get broken and beat up too much, leads me to support this, but I do like the idea of looking at an incentive approach instead. That's all I have.
Now, you both, two commissioners would talk about incentives, but what kind of incentives are you thinking about? Do you have any ideas for incentives?
Well, I think at the last time we considered this, it's because I'm not going to treat this as a do-over. It's not a do-over. I can't fairly kind of give my comments without talking about what I discussed last time we heard this. But I know that there's some discussion of this in the staff report, and I understand kind of the reasoning, but you know, if we talked about this a lot, actually, the last time we heard this, was the opportunity for developers to be able to put art on the fences that is creative branding, but is not advertising. I work in media, so I feel at liberty to be able to speak to this with a level of confidence, but there's a big difference between branding and advertising, and I think that if we can kind of, again, I don't know all of the logistics of how this would work, but if staff could bring back to us some of the parts of the sign ordinance pertaining to creative branding as opposed to just advertising, like here's my building or here's an ad, I actually think lots of developers would take advantage of it and surprise us in creative ways. That is one of the things that we talked about at the last meeting for incentives.
Thank you. John, do you want to address this?
I think one of the things we need to take note of is that this item was requested by council. So if they are really interested in having this passed in some form or another, we should focus our thoughts into passing it or in whatever form we think is acceptable, rather than just denying it in toto.
Okay. Rogerio.
Well, clearly, I'm in favor of it. In terms of the previous comments about it being an undue burden on developers, I ran some numbers on a 300 linear foot fence based on the numbers that staff have provided us. So if you have a 300 linear foot fence times 6 feet, which is the minimum requirement, it's 1,800 square feet times 21. The artist fee would be $37,800. And then you take that 1,800 square feet and multiply it times $2.55 square feet, it's $4,590. So we're talking a total of $42,390 plus the $117 fee. And when you're looking at a multi-million-dollar project like these projects would be, I don't see the cost impact being an undue burden on the developer. And I feel strongly that the art on construction fence process allows the developer to engage with the community in a unique way. It kind of shows that the developer cares about our community, understands what we're trying to be, where we want to go, and is willing to participate in our creative process.
Okay, thank you. Lynn?
I would agree with Rogerio's math. And certainly when you're talking about these larger projects that are tens of millions of dollars, this is an insignificant component. I would reiterate my motion that we make it all street facing, if that's the language that our attorney would use, that all street facing surfaces would be covered by this zone text amendment. I also would like to note for the record on page 6, it says in the public noticing that the Planning Division noticed all West Hollywood neighborhood groups. Until our election on August 2nd, I am still the point of contact for West Hollywood North, and we were not noticed. In fact, we've never been noticed by the city for anything. So just for the record, that did not happen. I do very much like the idea of interactive art. I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for creativity, and staff gave us some really good examples of how that could be incorporated. I'd also like to take a page from, I think it was Colorado, about the idea of having competitions. Now, here's a way we could publicize our city, publicize the creativity of our city, engage people, encourage new artists, and it could be a tremendous opportunity to really elevate this to an even higher level.
So, when this first came before the commission, I felt somewhat opposed to it. But as we've worked through this process, I've come to realize that there is a real benefit to this. I was opposed to it being mandated as a requirement. Then we changed it to buildings of over 10,000 square feet. So that satisfied that part of it for me. I like the idea of making it on all street facing. I think I was talking about that in one of our earlier sessions. And I like the interactive art idea. That seems like a lot of fun, and it's engaging, and a lot of participation, I think, would make it more interesting, and I would encourage the developers to try to find artists and just to be creative in that way, because I think it's really fun. And talk about involving the community. That's a good way to involve the community in that process. So I, at this point, am convinced that, even though I was opposed in the beginning, that it seems like it would be a good thing. And I didn't like the idea of requiring it, but I do understand and I do appreciate the math that helps me to feel more comfortable in recommending this and approving it and sending it on to council. So I'm prepared to support it. Any other comments before we vote? And first we close the public meeting and prepare to vote.
So if there is going to be a motion to apply this to all street faces,
yes,
the way I would write that is in section 1920-240A, applicability, the first paragraph 1. I think it would read, commercial properties under construction shall install temporary art along the perimeter construction fence of the property adjacent to the public right-of-way. So just take out the commercial facing.
Right.
And the rest of the sentence would remain the same, and I think that meets your intent.
Thank you. Yeah. Are you comfortable with that?
Excuse me?
Are you comfortable with that
Absolutely. I think
language?
that really, that achieves the objective.
Okay. Any other comments before we vote?
Motion passes, 5 ayes, 1 no by Commissioner Jones. There is no appeal process since it's a recommendation to City Council.
Thank you. And the next item is new business, and I understand we're going to get a little training on CEQA. Yes, move on down here. And this is a benefit to the public as well as to the new commissioners, so, and a good refresher for the rest of us.
Get it up there, and then, okay, F5. Okay, good evening. Lauren Langer, Assistant City Attorney. Since we have a few new faces on the Planning Commission, we thought it would be a good idea to do a CEQA training. I promise not to keep you here all night, but what we wanted to do was sort of a nuts and bolts from beginning to end, show you how the process works, because what you see is the final document coming across your desk, and sometimes they can be very large and overwhelming, and so if you could see how the process works from beginning to end, it might make a little bit more sense how the document got to you. So we will get started. We'll start with the purposes of CEQA. It has 4 main purposes: to foster public participation, and part of that is in the statute itself, which tells us how to accept written public comments and respond to public comments. It fosters informed decision makers so that you understand the environmental consequences of the projects before you vote on them. It requires that the project mitigate identified adverse impacts to either avoid or significantly reduce them, and to disclose to the public the reasons why a project with unavoidable impacts is still going to be approved. So there's a couple phases. The first is the preliminary analysis. We're going to look at what is a project, whether or not it's exempt from CEQA. Phase 2 is preparing an initial study, and I'll get into all these topics in a moment. And then phase 3 is preparation of either a negative declaration or an environmental impact report. So 3-step process. 1, does CEQA apply? If CEQA applies, could the project have a significant adverse impact? And based on those answers to the questions, we prepare an environmental document. So the questions we ask are, is the proposed activity a project? Is there discretion to deny the project, or is the decision ministerial, or does some other exemption apply? So CEQA applies to projects. Projects are activities that a public agency carries out, supports, or authorizes. It's a very broad definition. And the project may cause either a direct physical change to the environment or a reasonably foreseeable indirect change to the environment. So we're looking to activities that the city is going to either approve or do themselves that's going to result in a physical change to the environment. We get asked a lot whether ordinances are subject to CEQA, and many times they are. Most of the time they are, because the changes you make to the law could result in changes to the environment when these projects are eventually implemented. CEQA does not apply to ministerial acts. A project is ministerial when the agency merely determines whether a project conforms to applicable codes, and the agency has no discretion to deny the project. They do not exercise judgment over whether or how the project should be carried out. For your purposes, almost everything you're going to see is not ministerial, because it wouldn't be before this discretionary body to provide your discretion. But many things that are approved at a staff level are considered ministerial. Certain types of business licenses, final subdivision maps. If the project has complied with the 10 map conditions, the city must approve it. There is no discretion. Building permits in most cases are ministerial. These are all activities where CEQA wouldn't apply. It's important to note that CEQA does not apply to ministerial acts, even if they're going to have a significant environmental effect, because it only applies to discretionary projects where there's a physical change to the environment. So we're looking at physical change, not social or economic changes, except when those changes are reasonably foreseeable to result in physical change. Environment. Environment refers to the physical conditions that exist within the general area proposed by the project. Because CEQA is looking at the project's effect on the environment. Another question we get asked a lot is, what about the environment's effect on the project? So you have a residential housing project and it's next to a gas station. Yes, whether or not there are health effects from that gas station on the residents is an important consideration, but it's not a CEQA question because we're not looking at the gas station's impacts on the residential housing product. That's something that's called reverse CEQA. Another example that comes up a lot is, in fact, I just heard this at a Planning Commission hearing on Tuesday night. A resident came up with concerns about asbestos removal at a demolition that was going to happen next to this resident's house. Now, asbestos removal is a very serious concern. There are state laws that govern it to make sure that it's done safely. But the impact to the one resident, his question about asbestos is not a CEQA question. It's not a question of impacts to the environment generally. It's a question about whether or not the project can comply with state law to protect that owner from a health impact. So you see that we're looking at impacts to the environment generally, the project area generally. So just to quickly recap, is the activity a project? It is a project if it's a public agency committing to carry out or approve the activity. It's discretionary and it's going to result in physical changes to the environment. So if the activity meets this criteria, the next step is to ask whether or not the project is exempt. And this is something that your planning staff is going to do when the application first comes in. They're going to look at it and say, does CEQA even apply, or is the project exempt from CEQA? So what does it mean to be exempt from CEQA? There are two types of exemptions. There are statutory exemptions and there are categorical exemptions. Now, what this means is the legislature has decided that even though we have all these rules for environmental review, there are certain types of projects that the legislature has just determined either don't require CEQA review or by their very nature will not result in impacts to the environment, and therefore CEQA review is not going to apply. The statutory exemptions, we don't see those so much. Those are very specific. Feasibility and planning studies, emergency projects. So if there's an emergency that needs to be rectified, no one has to stop and do CEQA review to make sure that, we want to keep our residents safe. Disapproved projects, so if you deny a project, it's not subject to CEQA. Rates, tolls, fares, things of that nature. What we do see a lot are categorical exemptions, and these are the types of projects where the legislature have said that by their very nature, they're not going to cause negative impacts to the environment. Some of the examples you'll see, minor alterations to existing structures or facilities where they're not expanding the use, replacement, reconstruction of existing structures on the same site, new conversion or conversion of small structures, minor land alterations, accessory structures. You're getting the sense for what these types of projects are. They're fairly small in nature. Probably the exemption that we see the most in an urban city like West Hollywood is infill development projects. And that exemption says that if the project is in line with the general plan and the zoning, there's no sensitive habitat around, it's not going to create traffic impacts or noise impacts, that it's generally exempt from CEQA because it's what the city has already studied in its general plan and it's what you're expecting to see on this site. But categorical exemptions are narrowly construed to afford the fullest possible environmental protection within reasonable scope of the statute. Categorical exemptions can also be stacked. A couple of them may apply to one different project. The last issue with categorical exemptions is the common sense exemption. And this is exemption where it doesn't quite fall into one of those categories that I went through before, but if we can say with certainty that there is no possibility that this activity may have a significant effect on the environment, and that conclusion is supported by evidence, we would rely on the common sense exemption to say that CEQA doesn't apply to that project. So even if an exception applies, there are exceptions to the exemptions. It's a tongue twister.
The law.
A lot. So usually this means even though you fall under the categorical exemption, there are some unusual circumstances on this site, which means it's different than all the other projects that fall under that category. And so every time we look at an exemption, we also check to see if there's unusual circumstances, if there's a historic resource on site, if there was hazardous waste or pollution found on this property. You can't rely on an exemption if some of these unusual circumstances are present, because we know they're different than the other projects we typically see for that category. If a project is exempt from CEQA, it's not required to, but they often do prepare a notice of exemption. It's filed and posted at the county clerk's office. And when we file this, it shortens the time period to challenge the decision from 180 days to 35 days. So the city should always file its notice of exemption. Is going to be your lawyer's advice. Step 2, if the activity is a project and it is not exempt, the agency takes the next step, which is preparing an initial study. And you've all probably seen these. What it is a checklist with analysis to determine whether there's substantial evidence of a fair argument that the project may have a significant adverse effect on the environment. So when we're looking at this, we're not weighing evidence to decide whether or not one side of the argument is better. If there is evidence of a significant impact, a fair argument, that means that an EIR is going to be required at that stage. So you go through this checklist to help make that determination. The initial study, it looks very similar to an EIR, but it's much, much shorter. It has each of the same topics, and it asks all the threshold questions, and then there should be an analysis underneath, deciding whether or not there's a potential of an impact. So there's two types of negative declarations. The first is a regular negative declaration, and that's when you go through the checklist, and the answer is always that there is no substantial evidence to support a fair argument of a significant impact. Pretty much you're checking no in every box, you're supporting that with substantial evidence, and you adopt a negative declaration. The second document is called a mitigated negative declaration, and there's a little bit of confusion over what this is, but essentially it says there's a possibility there could be an impact, but if the developer agrees to some changes in the project that could avoid the impact or mitigate it to a level of significance, and they agree to it beforehand, we can, there's a million different scenarios. For the billboard, you could turn down the lighting, and then you determine that, well, there's not going to be an impact if the lighting is limited to this level. Things of that nature that can go into the design, the developer can agree to beforehand, and you can say, well, okay, if they do these one or two things, it's the same as a negative declaration. You're sort of changing the project description to include these things, and then you can say that there is no substantial evidence of a significant impact. If you do your initial study and you find out that there is substantial evidence of an argument of an impact, then the city is required to prepare an environmental impact report. Let me say one more thing. If there's a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration, the city prepares a notice of intent to adopt. They send it to the county clerk. Public notice is required. There is a comment period, typically for 20 days. Occasionally it will be 30 days if it's a project of area-wide significance. Prior to project approval, the decision maker is going to consider the negative declaration or the MND along with any comments received during the public review period, and there are going to be written responses to every comment that was received during the review period in that document. So you will get all of that as your package with your agenda materials for a project, so you can see the conclusions, the public comments, the responses to public comments, and then you can kind of have a full understanding of all of the issues and issue areas that were looked at before approving your project. So if there's no substantial evidence, I'm going to say this test over and over again, no substantial evidence to support a fair argument that there will be an adverse effect on the environment, and you find that the negative declaration reflects the agency's independent judgment, then you can adopt it. Once it's adopted, the city files a notice of determination, and again, this shortens the statute of limitations to challenge the decision from 180 days to 30 days. So it's very important to file notices of determination. So if the initial study reveals that there could potentially be an impact, then the city is required to prepare an EIR. The first step in EIR preparation is to send out a notice of preparation. And this allows the city as a lead agency to receive some public comment and get some guidance on where the EIR should analyze areas of potential impacts that the consultants need to focus on. So it's the first opportunity for public input. It's going to describe the project, the location, the likely environmental issues, and the project's probable environmental effects if it's known at that time. Scoping meetings are also handled at this stage. Now, in some cases, they're required for projects of regional significance, when Caltrans is involved, when it's also being conducted in accordance with a federal agency. There's also voluntary scoping meetings, which are very helpful to identify actions, alternatives, mitigation measures, and what types of issues the neighbors in the area are interested in having analyzed in depth. And it also helps the preparers understand unimportant issues that do not need to be studied in detail. So the applicant can request a scoping meeting. I always recommend a scoping meeting because it's very important to hear public input from the outset of this process. There might be things that neighbors are aware of in the area that other people don't know. So it's an important part of the process. So contents of an EIR. An EIR must accurately describe the proposed project. The project description is very important so that people reading the EIR and the decision makers have a full understanding of what this project entails. It's one of the most important parts of the document. It needs to analyze and identify each significant environmental impact expected to result from the project. It must identify mitigation measures to reduce those impacts to the extent feasible. It must evaluate a range of alternatives, and it must include a statement indicating the reasons for determining that any effects on the environment are not significant and have not been discussed in detail. And that could be because your initial study said, well, there's absolutely no possibility of, for example, an impact to biological resources on this site. So that's going to be an area that may not be discussed in as much detail as some of the other impact areas. An EIR must describe in a separate section any significant effects on the environment that cannot be avoided if the project were implemented, and if any environmental impacts are irreversible. So although a lead agency must use its best efforts to predict and analyze impacts, CEQA does not require analysis of speculative impacts nor consideration of the unforeseeable. So we typically say we do the best we can with the information that we can. If an EIR included speculative information, it would not provide you with meaningful information about the impacts of this project. So, and again, the preparers can't consider the unforeseeable, but they do the best they can to make a good faith effort to understand what the impacts of the project will be. CEQA does not require the EIR to contain trade secrets, information about archaeological sites or sacred lands, or any other information not subject to disclosure under the Public Records Act. So one of the recent changes in state law is requiring consultation with Native American tribes if they have any concerns about grading or digging on particular sites. However, if the Native American tribes provide the city information in this mandated consultation process, some of it is confidential information. It's actually going to be maintained in a confidential index that's not published for the rest of the public to see, because it's private confidential information under state law, and it could contain I guess the reason behind it is they don't want people going out and destroying those remains. And so if the tribe says that it's confidential information, it's probably one of the few areas that I've seen a confidential index to be part of an administrative or and part of an EIR. The staff can see it. It creates a challenge, and I haven't dealt with any litigation challenging the findings yet on the Sacred Lands consultation, but typically it's the tribe that's requesting protections for a particular piece of land that they're concerned with, and so as long as you consult with the tribe and you come to a reasonable agreement as to how that land can be protected, it hasn't typically been an issue. Yes, it's considered, but the specific information that the tribe provided about sacred lands is kept in a confidential index. So again, the preparers make a good faith effort to provide meaningful information to the public and decision makers. We spoke a little bit about the project description. It's a very important part of the EIR. The other thing that needs to be described is the baseline, because when you're looking at an environmental impact, you need to know what your existing conditions are, so that when you're trying to see if there's any change from the project, you have to understand what the baseline is. So there's a lot of discussion as to existing traffic conditions, existing land uses in the area. When you hear the term baseline, this is what they're referring to. So if we're doing quantitative analysis or even qualitative analysis, you want to understand our starting point, so everyone has the same frame of reference and doesn't have different expectations as to what is being compared. The EIR must discuss any inconsistencies between the proposed project and applicable general and regional plans. That typically comes up in the land use chapter, but it could also come up in air quality because there are regional air quality plans. It could come up in the transportation section because there are regional transportation plans. So that's something that you'll see a lot of in the different chapters. So the impacts are going to be the same impact categories that you saw in the initial study. And it took me a long time to realize this, but when you look in the EIR, the impact categories are always going to be alphabetical. So if you're looking for aesthetics, I know those binders can be very overwhelming when you get them on your desk. If you're looking for air quality or aesthetics, start at the beginning. If you're looking for transportation or public services, flip towards the end. It's going to be an easy way to find the categories. They look at air quality, agricultural, biology, cultural resources, geology, hazardous materials, hydrology, land use, minerals, noise, population, public services, recreation, transportation, and utility and service systems. So these are kind of the standard categories that you're going to see in each EIR. So what the EIR is really doing is it's looking at each of those impact categories, and there's going to be some thresholds of significance. So how do you tell when an impact is significant? There's going to be a rule that says if the project creates more than 500 trips, or if the project generates more than X amount of this air pollutant, there's going to be specific rules, and they're going to be laid out telling you exactly what we're looking for. Many agencies rely on something called Appendix G. If you hear that term, it just means in the back of the CEQA guidelines, there's samples for what standards you could use for determining your thresholds. Lead agencies can also rely on locally adopted thresholds, and West Hollywood is one of the few cities I work in that actually does have local thresholds. So we have adopted local traffic thresholds, which are very specific to this city, and it is quantifiable. If a certain amount of traffic is created, either an additional traffic study will be required or won't be required, and there are objective rules as to how to determine when you have a traffic impact based on local studies that we've done related to our existing traffic conditions. So that's actually very helpful and very meaningful because you're not using a one-size-fits-all threshold. You're using something that's really tailored to West Hollywood. So when you're reading the documents, the conclusions have to be supported by substantial evidence. So there's going to be a threshold, there's going to be an analysis of whether or not that threshold is exceeded, and the preparers are going to support those conclusions with substantial evidence. This means enough relevant information and inferences from that information that a fair argument can be made to support a conclusion, even if other conclusions can be reached. So we can all read the same document and we might weigh certain things differently or come to a different conclusion or have a different opinion about it, but so long as the conclusion is supported by evidence, even if you could come to a different conclusion, that is what CEQA requires, that the conclusions be supported. So substantial evidence means facts, reasonable assumptions based on facts, expert opinions supported by facts. Substantial evidence is not argument, speculation, unsubstantiated opinions, inaccurate information, or evidence of social or economic impacts that do not change the physical environment. So when you're reading comment letters and when you're hearing public testimony, it's one of the jobs that you have is to weigh all this evidence and understand, well, is this expert testimony? Is it someone's opinion who doesn't have a professional background to be opining in noise studies? It's your job to weigh all these things and determine what are facts versus what are opinions, and you can take them all into account and weigh them, as to what, how you see fit, but you just need to be able to understand the difference between facts, assumptions based on facts, and expert opinion versus sheer speculation. So when a court is looking at an EIR, they're not going to weigh conflicting evidence to determine who has the better evidence. When a court is looking at whether or not an EIR is adequate, they're just looking to see whether it's supported by substantial evidence, and they're not going to substitute, the judge is not going to substitute their judgment of the evidence or the project for the city's. They're just going to make sure that you made a decision based on, a reasonable decision that was based on evidence supported in your document. Disagreement among experts is permissible. You might get one noise expert that says one thing and one noise expert that says another thing, and that's okay. And sometimes you have more subjective topics like cultural resources, and you're going to have a disagreement among experts. And you, as decision makers, get to weigh which opinion is more valuable to you. But for purposes of looking at whether or not your EIR is adequate, it's okay to have a disagreement among the experts. The document just needs to explain why each expert came to a different conclusion. That's the most important part. An EIR has to discuss growth-inducing impacts, and it's also going to include a discussion of cumulative impacts. And this will come up in two different places. Sometimes you will see a document that has each impact category, and at the end of that chapter, there will be an analysis of cumulative impacts. Some companies prepare them that way. Other companies will do all your impact categories, and then they'll have another chapter at the end that says cumulative impacts. It's providing you the same information. They're just different preparers put them in different parts of the document. So what this is looking at is even if a project on its own does not create an impact, when considered together with other projects, there might be impacts that are cumulatively considerable in the area, and that's something that CEQA demands that we look at. So the document, the EIR, is going to have a list of related projects. These are past, present, and reasonably foreseeable future projects, so that you can have information that if this project happens a year from now, what other projects are in the pipeline, and are they going to add traffic that together could create a problem, or add noise that together could be a problem when on their own they wouldn't be. So as decision makers, that's an important piece of the puzzle for you to understand, because you're trying to make the best decision you can, and while some things in the future are unknown, you can at least have evidence of what projects have been approved or are being considered now to weigh as part of your decision. As I mentioned before, economic and social changes are not considered environmental impacts, but they only need to be considered to the extent they would lead to an environmental change. Another very important part of the EIR is the alternative section, and this CEQA says that the EIR must describe a range of reasonable alternatives to the project or its location that could feasibly obtain most of the project objectives and would avoid or substantially lessen any of the significant impacts of the project. So the developer, when they apply, is going to put together a list of project objectives, what they're trying to achieve by doing this project. And what a reasonable range of alternatives is one that could reasonably meet most of those objectives and may still be able to reduce some of the impacts from the project. The range of alternatives is governed by what we call the rule of reason. It has to be a reasonable range. The EIR only needs to set forth alternatives necessary to permit the lead agency to make a reasoned choice. It does not need to consider every conceivable alternative to a project because that list is indefinite. So they're going to come up with a reasonable range of alternatives to this project. And the alternatives chosen are going to be dependent upon what types of significant impacts the project has, because the alternatives are going to be tailored to trying to reduce or eliminate those impacts. So again, the discussion is limited to alternatives that meet the objectives. They have to be feasible, and they would avoid or substantially lessen the environmental impacts. The EIR briefly describes the rationale for selection and rejection of alternatives and the information the lead agency relied on when making the selection. The document must also identify any alternatives that were considered but rejected as infeasible during the scoping process and explain the reason for their exclusion. Alternatives may be rejected if they fail to meet the project objectives, if they're infeasible for economic, social, or other reasons, or fail to avoid any of the project's identified significant environmental impacts. So it doesn't need to, I sort of mentioned this before, it doesn't need to study an alternative if it's not going to reduce or eliminate one of the identified impacts for the project. CEQA also requires that the EIR study a no project alternative to allow the decision makers to compare the impacts of approving the project with the impacts of not approving the project at all. And then once you have your list of impacts, of significant impacts, the EIR requires that mitigation measures be imposed. There's different types of mitigation measures to try and avoid or reduce that impact. They have to be fully enforceable to ensure that they will be effective, which means that you have to be able to condition them in your project and make them part of your mitigation monitoring report, which we'll get to in just a moment. Mitigation measures can be avoidance measures, minimization measures, restoration measures, reducing measures, compensation measures. They can really run the gamut. And the EIR is required to discuss whether and how each measure avoids or substantially reduces an impact. It has to distinguish measures that were proposed by the project proponent, identify who is responsible for implementing each mitigation measure, whether it's the applicant or the city. If the city's going to go out and restripe the lanes, or the applicant is going to widen a sidewalk, it's going to have to explain who's doing the work. Discuss the basis for selecting the measure, and analyze each potential impact after the mitigation measure. So you have an impact, they come up with ideas for how that impact can be reduced or avoided, and then there should be a discussion of will there still be an impact after we do this? When the document is complete, the city gives notice that the draft EIR is completed and available for review. The notice of completion is filed with the State Office of Planning and Research, and it includes a description of the project, the address where the EIR can be reviewed, and the review period. A notice of availability is also prepared. It's posted for 30 days with the county clerk, distributed to all responsible agencies, which are agencies that may also have approval power over the project, and distributed by mail to people who have requested notice. It's also typically published in the newspaper, posted on the project site, or mailed to owners of contiguous properties. It also includes description of the project, location, the specific time period where public comments will be accepted, if we know at the time any public meetings that are scheduled to take place, and a list of the environmental effects anticipated to result from the project. It also says where the EIR can be found for review. Most days people review them now online, but you will still find copies, I believe, at the public library and at City Hall, and whether the project is on a hazardous waste site. Public comment period for EIRs is 30 days unless the project is of statewide or regional significance. It can be extended if for some reason the city wants to allow more time for public comment. And any person can submit comments concerning any of the project's environmental impacts. When other agencies are commenting on an EIR, their comments should really be limited to their area of expertise. Caltrans should really only be talking about transportation issues and not about cultural resources, for example. But any other public agency can submit comments on the project that will affect resources within the agency's area of expertise. And the lead agency is required to respond in writing to each timely comment that raises a significant environmental issue. So like with the negative declarations, after the public comment period closes, the lead agency and the environmental impact report preparers will read each letter and respond in writing to each comment that is received, so that when you get this document, again, you can see all of the comments that people have raised, and whether there's some merit to it, whether there's something that can be added to the document to, if something wasn't explained properly or needed a little bit more information, that can be added to the record through that process, to really fill in the gaps, to make sure that you have all the information you need when you're making your decision. So once those responses to comments are complete, there will be a final EIR. Now, some people get tripped up by this term because they think it means it's been approved. And final just means it's the draft, it's the comments, it's the responses to comments, any information that was added during that comment period, and that package creates a final EIR. And that is what is going to come before you as a decision-making body. And so when you are reviewing a project that is subject to an EIR, you're also required to certify the EIR. What that means to certify the EIR, you're just determining that the EIR was completed in compliance with CEQA. It reflects the lead agency's independent judgment and analysis, and that you have reviewed it before making your decision. Certifying the EIR does not mean that you are approving the project or that you're even in favor of the project. Certifying the EIR is a necessary procedural step just to document that you've received the information to explain the environmental impacts of the project to you. You can certify the EIR and still vote no on a project if it's not something that you support. So that's just an important distinction to know. This is just a procedural step to finalize the EIR process. So it's a final document, and it shows that it's been completed in compliance with CEQA. So when there are significant and unavoidable impacts from a project, or I should say significant impacts, you're also going to be asked to make findings when you're adopting the project or approving the project. And those findings are that changes or alterations have been incorporated into the project that would avoid or substantially lessen them. That means you found mitigation to get rid of them. Or such changes are within the jurisdiction of another agency, and that agency should adopt the changes. I've had that issue come up recently, where the only available mitigation was on a Caltrans controlled street, and the city couldn't adopt the mitigation measure because it's up to Caltrans to do it. So that's a decision subject that comes up sometimes. And or specific economic, legal, social, technical, or other considerations make mitigation measures or project alternatives infeasible. So that's really the process. You have your impacts, you see if there's any mitigation that could reduce your impacts, you see if there's any alternatives to the project that could reduce your impacts, and if those mitigation or alternatives are infeasible for economic, legal, social, technical, or other considerations, then you may still approve the project even though there are significant and unavoidable impacts. And when you do that, you adopt something called a statement of overriding considerations. I know this is a lot of information, but we're almost done. This is the end of the process. So a statement of overriding considerations. And essentially what you're saying, if you adopt a statement of overriding considerations, is we understand that there's some impacts from this project that can't be avoided, but the benefits of this project outweigh those impacts, and so we're still going to approve this project. It's another statement of findings that have to be supported by substantial evidence, and you're going to say that for whatever reason it is, that those benefits of the project outweigh the impacts. So this is how a project with environmental impacts can still be approved. And it's a judgment call. You're weighing the impacts versus the benefits of the project, and you decide how you want to act on that project. For projects within EIR, there's also going to be a mitigation monitoring program, and this is going to be sort of a matrix at the end of your whole packet of information that has each mitigation measure, when that mitigation measure is going to be implemented, who does the work, who's responsible for oversight. So it's sort of like a checklist. At the end of the project, nothing's going to get missed because it is all in that matrix. Here, we have the mitigation monitoring program attached with your CEQA documents. We also put those as conditions of approval in the permit also. So you're going to find them in two places. We're going to adopt all those mitigation measures as conditions, which also just brings me to one important point, the distinction between mitigation measures and land use conditions. The mitigation measures are going to be the measures we talked about that are specific. They're in your EIR. There is analysis to show how they will reduce impacts, and those are the measures to reduce your environmental impacts. The other thing you're going to be doing when you review projects is imposing land use conditions. We've looked at all these through the different projects we've reviewed. And land use conditions are going to ensure compatibility. They're going to deal with the design issues we've talked about, maybe impacts to a particular neighbor, or whatever those sort of land use issues are, a little bit different than the environmental mitigation measures, which are looking at the environment generally. So just keep those in mind when you're thinking about how you want to condition a project. Are you talking about mitigation measures, because there's a CEQA process, or are you talking about your land use conditions, because we'll deal with those at the public hearing on the process as you hear from residents and deal with issues. Once the decision is made, the city will file a notice of determination. That also shortens the statute of limitations to challenge the project from 180 days to 30 days. And that is CEQA 101 in a nutshell. I know. There's a lot of nuances, there's a lot of case law, there's a lot of challenging issues, and you will get the lawyer letters that come across your desk as you're reviewing projects, and we'll deal with all those issues as they come up. But this was sort of like I said, the nuts and bolts 101 of the process and how it works and how we get that negative declaration or EIR on your desk.
Can you send us that PowerPoint presentation?
I was going to say the same thing. Do you have it? Do you have your slides on?
We also have a paper, I think, on our firm's website that's a little bit shorter, but
Really?
has sort of the nuts and bolts. So maybe I can try and track that down too.
Because this was good. That's all I want. And it's very helpful for me, and it was more concise and organized than I've usually seen it approached. So it was very helpful.
I'm glad. There's a lot of acronyms and there's a lot of catchphrases, and they can really trip people up. So that's the information we wanted you to have.
So you could make it available?
Yeah.
Okay. We'd appreciate it. Right?
Yep. There are also courses that are given by University Extension and other sources that I suggest that I took it, and I suggest that everybody take it once.
I took it also, but maybe it's just after a while that this made more sense to me. So it was really good. Thank you.
And if any of the commissioners want to talk to me offline with specific questions, I'm always available.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Any questions at this time with regard to this? Seeing none, we go on to the next item. Thank you, Lauren, very much. Unfinished business, there is none. There's nothing on an excluded consent calendar. Items from staff. Bianca, I know.
Not this evening, thank
Not
you.
really? No? Okay, good. It's getting late, but I'm always welcome to have anything that you add. Public comment? Any public comment at this time?
No public comment.
None. Items from commissioners?
I have one.
Okay.
Todd Williamson, an Arts and Cultural Affairs Commissioner, and myself are working to propose an annual West Hollywood Art and Design Awards program. The point of the program would be to commemorate and celebrate projects in the visual arts and performing arts and architecture. So I was wondering if we could agendize this so we could discuss it in the future.
Wouldn't you first propose it to staff?
I'm not sure. I was asked to agendize it, so whichever was the right procedure.
You just want to have a discussion with the commission about the potential for creating it?
Right.
Yeah, how to unfold it. And it'd be a joint effort between Arts and Cultural Affairs and the Planning Commission, obviously.
Okay.
And Todd Williamson's already made the announcement at Arts and Cultural Affairs.
Wouldn't it need to be recommendation to the council?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think they would have.
Your recommendation to council, that form.
They would have to implement it.
Yeah, I think we can put that on a future agenda. We will reach out
Council
to
rather
arts
than to here.
staff to coordinate with them. It would require recommendation of the council to establish that program.
Okay.
Council.
But you'd like to have a discussion about the potential program with the commission?
Well, we're really just skeletal. We're just sort of an ideas thing right now. And I was just wanting to let everybody know that we're thinking about this and what the proper procedures might be to implement something like this over a period of time. It probably wouldn't be till next year, but we thought it would be a great way to communicate to the community which projects and which performing arts and which visual arts we'd like to commend.
I don't know, but I think it would be beneficial to commission if it comes here, or even to council, that you have a little bit more firm idea.
Okay.
My recommendation.
Okay.
I would agree that if you had, you know, a draft, an outline, and then bring it to commission to discuss, and obviously with the public noticing, then we could, you know, get additional creative ideas from our city. I think it'd be great.
I think it's a great idea.
Okay.
General, but I'd love to see more of what you have in mind.
So now we know.
Encourage you to work on it.
Thank you.
Anything else from commissioners at this time? No, seeing none, we'll move on. I think we're going to move to adjournment, but I do want to make mention for public and for commission that the July 27th meeting is canceled. So we're adjourning then to a regular scheduled meeting, which will be on Thursday, August 3rd, 2017, at 6:30 here in this meeting room. And that's it. Thank you, everybody. Good night.